LoveLore Library. Chapter 703. Not convinced. Mo Xiaoyao seemed to have heard a joke. He looked at Bai Qingning's beautiful face contorted with anger and unwillingness. What right do you have to say that to I? You caused Li Li to be injured, all of you deserve to die. His voice was very low, and the noblewomen not far away did not hear him. But when it fell into Bai Qingning's ears, it was like a deafening drum. In that moment, Bai Qingning even thought that she saw Mo Xiaoyao's eyes flashing with a red light, as if he was a demon of the world. She couldn't help but scream. Not far away, Madame Bai saw this scene and understood that things were not as good as she thought. She hurriedly stumbled over, "Prince, my daughter." Seeing that Mo Xiaoyao had no intention of opening his mouth, Feng Zhiyao faintly opened his mouth to explain. Miss Bai caused Wang Fei to fall into a coma from fright and fourth young master to be heavily injured. This way, it could not be considered as wronging Bai Qingning. If she had not been in the way, the guards would have already sent Su Qingbai away and would not have lost sight of one thing and the other. In the end, both of them were almost injured. What? Madame Bai was shocked and said in a trembling voice. She did not dare to believe that her daughter, who had always been obedient and intelligent, would cause such a disaster in such a short period of time. Bai Qingning also understood that this was a matter of life and death. She hurriedly grabbed Madame Bai and said, "Mother, I am innocent. I did not harm the Prince Ding mansion and fourth young master Su. I am innocent. Prince." Madame Bai swallowed with difficulty and said in a trembling voice, "Prince, this is most likely a misunderstanding. My daughter would not do such a thing. Please, Prince, for the sake of the Bai family's loyalty, investigate this matter thoroughly." Mo Xiaoyao, who had been resting with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes. His gaze swept over Madame Bai like a knife. He asked, "Madame Bai, is threatening I? This concubine doesn't dare. Prince, please understand." Madame Bai was so scared that she fell to the ground and didn't dare to say another word. Mo Xiaoyao glanced coldly at Bai Qingning. "Take her away. I don't want to see her again." Feng Zhiyao sighed in his heart. Actually, Bai Qingning's crime did not warrant death, she could only blame her own bad luck. He waved his hand and ordered his men to drag her away. Bai Qingning kept struggling, but how could she compare to the strength of two grown men? She was dragged out without hesitation, and only Bai Qingning's shrill cries could be heard from afar. "No! I don't want to die. Mother, save me, I don't want to die." The mournful screams that came with the wind gradually stopped. The faces of the noble ladies in the flower garden were indeed pale as they shivered in the cold wind. Madame Bai stared blankly in the direction where her daughter disappeared. Finally, she could not help but burst into tears. She only had this one daughter in her entire life, and she had high hopes for her since she was young. Bai Qingning did not fail to live up to her expectations, but now she had been killed by Prince Ding. How could she accept this? Two guards came over, one on the left and one on the right, and carried Madame Bai out. The prince was in a bad mood. If she continued to cry here, it was very likely that the prince's mood would become even worse. At that time, it would not be just these people who would suffer. "Prince." Madame Sun hurried over with a booklet. When she saw the corpses on the ground, her face only changed color. She walked over to Mo Xiaoyao without blinking and said in a low voice, "The thing the prince wants is here." Feng Zhiyao couldn't help but look at the woman in front of him with praise. As a woman in the boudoir, she was not as good as Princess Ding on the battlefield of the imperial court. However, to have this kind of courage and composure was already extraordinary. Mo Xiaoyao took the booklet and flipped through it. His expression became even more gloomy. After a while, He closed the booklet with a snap and threw it into Lin Han's arms behind him. He said, "Bring everything according to the booklet to I." Lin Han caught the booklet and stuffed it into his arms without even looking. He said loudly, "This subordinate obeys." Then he turned and disappeared from the garden like the wind. This day, the most bloody scene in the West Hill in the past 50 to 60 years played out in the city of the Emperor Xiling. Even when Genom of Gojoseon seized power and suppressed the ministers of the imperial court, there had not been such a tragic scene. Outside the gates of the Sun family's garden, almost all the noble families in the imperial city, regardless of age or gender, were pulled out of the garden. The entire intersection was filled with people. 1/3 of the clans in the imperial city were executed on the streets outside the flower garden. Such an important matter naturally alarmed the Emperor Xiling, and he hurried out of the palace. Unfortunately, even the Emperor Xiling himself could not save these people's lives. The streets outside the Sun family's garden were filled with blood. The entire street was almost dyed with dark red blood. This day, a duke, a princess, 2 marquises, 4 officials of the 3rd rank and above, 12 officials of the 5th rank and above, and countless officials of the 5th rank and below were killed in West Hill. And all of this was only because Princess Ding was assassinated. For a moment, the world was horrified. The records of West Hill. Last Emperor's Yearbook. In September, Princess Ding was assassinated in the imperial city. The king was furious. The imperial city was bathed in blood. It was called the blood calamity of the Sun family's garden. Records of Chu. Prince Ding's records. King Ding Huan's chapter. In September, the princess and the Emperor Xiling were assassinated in West Hill. The king was furious. He killed more than 100 people related to King Nan. 3 out of 10 nobles in the imperial city were killed. The world was shocked. For example, the unofficial history of Princess Ding Huan's biography. Prince Ding killed more than half of the nobles in West Hill for Princess Ding. The Emperor Xiling's city was bathed in blood and the souls of the dead were wailing. Prince Ding and Princess Ding's relationship could move the heavens. But his iron fist in killing countless people was all because of his concubine. Lady Yi could be called a femme fatale. Regardless of how this bloody storm smeared Prince Ding's reputation, there were many nobles who were forced to watch the execution who were scared out of their wits. There were even rumors that some of the more timid ones were so scared that they fell ill when they returned. Some of them even died a few days later. But none of this affected Mo Xiuyao at all. Ever since Yi Li had fainted, Prince Ding's face had not shown any expression that could be called gentle. Even when he smiled, people couldn't help but shudder. Even the news that Yi Li was pregnant did not make Mo Xiuyao feel any joy. Every time he inadvertently saw Mo Xiuyao's dark eyes stare at Wang Fei's still flat stomach, Feng Zhiyao couldn't help but feel a wave of fear. But thinking about it, the prince had also disliked the little Shitzi in the past. Hadn't the little Shitzi bounced around and grown up? Now, could he still go against the prince? Prince. In a quiet and elegant room, Yi Li was lying quietly on the bed, fast asleep. Mo Xiuyao sat by the bed, half of his body leaning on the bed. He silently looked at Yi Li's sleeping face with a gentle gaze. Hearing Feng Zhiyao's voice, he sat up and said in a deep voice, "Come in." Feng Zhiyao walked in and glanced at the sleeping woman on the bed and the white-haired man still sitting by the bed. He sighed inside and reported in a deep voice, "Prince, all the people related to the assassins and the people that Sun Foreign found have been imprisoned. We really have to." Those nobles who had been scared out of their wits did not know that the blood they saw today was just the tip of the iceberg. More people were waiting for Mo Xiuyao's decision. Chapter 704. When a king was angry, blood would flow like a river. Feng Zhiyao couldn't help but think of his teacher's teachings and sighs when he was young. He didn't know if the people who planned today's events would regret it. Don't leave a single one alive. Mo Xiaoyao's voice was soft, his slender fingers gently brushing Yi Li's beautiful face. The meaning behind his words was filled with blood and murderous intent. Feng Zhiyao wasn't surprised by this. He thought for a moment and asked, Prince, do you really think that this was done by Genom of Gojoseon? This time, it could be said that Jinan Palace's connections in the royal city had been completely uprooted. This included the entire Jinan Palace. Even though Genom of Gojoseon didn't have many children, Lei Tingfeng had many children. Long before the Mahist army entered the city, Lei Tingfeng's 2 legitimate sons had already been taken out of the royal city. However, there were still a few illegitimate sons and daughters in the prince's palace. It wasn't that Genom of Gojoseon's actions didn't make sense. However, if it really was Genom of Gojoseon, it would be even more dangerous than this time. In fact, this time, if it wasn't for Princess Ding's special body, these assassins wouldn't have been able to touch a single hair on her. Moreover, Lei Zhenting couldn't possibly not understand that if Yi Li really was assassinated, it wouldn't be something that could be resolved by just killing a few people. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the entire emperor of Xiling City would be wiped out. Even if it wasn't him, it's because he didn't discipline him well. Mo Xiaoyao said coldly. Feng Zhiyao wasn't in the mood to sympathize with Lei Zhenting, who had been angered. He changed the topic and asked, Prince killed by Qingning of the Bai family just like that. Is it really okay? Mo Xiaoyao glanced at him coldly. It's already been killed. What's the point of saying this? Feng Zhiyao sighed helplessly. What I mean is, what does the prince of the Bai family plan to do? I'm afraid that after this incident, the Bai family will have a knot in their hearts. The prince has to be on guard against them. No matter what, the Bai family was still one of the top families in Xiling. Mo Xiaoyao snorted coldly and said, Can the Bai family have half a talent among the concubines? I don't need trash. This subordinate understands. Feng Zhiyao nodded. How is Su Qingbai? Mo Xiaoyao asked with a frown. If anything happened to Su Qingbai, given Li Li's temperament, she would definitely feel guilty for the rest of her life. This wasn't something Mo Xiaoyao wanted to see. Furthermore, Su Qingbai had blocked the sword for Li Li. If that sword had pierced Li Li's body. Thinking of this possibility, Mo Xiaoyao released his murderous aura without restraint. Feng Zhiyao raised his eyebrows. He didn't understand how the prince could release murderous aura just because he was concerned about 4th young Master Su's injuries. The doctor, the imperial physician, and our own military doctor have already examined 4th young master. He didn't injure any vital parts, but he lost a lot of blood. He's still unconscious now. I'm afraid he'll have to recuperate for a long time. Although he was unconscious, the doctor had prescribed him many sleeping and pain-relieving medicines. A sword pierced through his back. Not to mention a weak scholar like Su Qingbai, even martial artists like them would have to suffer a lot. Therefore, it was better for him to sleep and suffer less. Mo Xiaoyao nodded. Pass down the order to take good care of him. If anything happens to 4th young Master Su, don't blame I for being merciless. Feng Zhiyao was silent. After today, who would dare to go against Prince Ding's orders? Did they not want to live anymore? Prince, Zhuojing requests an audience. Zhuojing's voice came from outside the door. Mo Xiaoyao said to Feng Zhiyao, You go first. Zhuojing, come in. Zhuojing walked in and brushed past Feng Zhiyao. Prince, Princess, it's nothing. Mo Xiaoyao said calmly, What's the matter? I asked you to investigate. Zhuojing said respectfully, The name list provided by Sun Hui and Yang is basically true. The person who instigated these people has already left the city. This subordinate ordered people to secretly follow him. The person seems to be from Dechu State. However, the information from the Prince Ding mansion did not reveal this person's identity. Now that the person is heading north, he should be heading in the direction of the Chu capital. Mo Xiaoyao lowered his eyes and muttered to himself for a moment. Dechu State. Mo Jingli has already gone south. Why is he going to the Chu capital? No, there is another person who has many people from Dechu State as his subordinates. Ren Qining. Lin Yuan. Xue Jing's mind turned. Prince suspects that this is the work of the northern region. Mo Xiaoyao smiled but did not answer. He ordered calmly, send people to follow him. If he is really one of Ren Qining's men, Xue Jing silently waited for Mo Xiaoyao's orders. After a long time, Mo Xiaoyao chuckled. I remember that Ren Qining has a wife and several children from a northern region tribe, right? Yes. Ren Qining was able to become the ruler of the northern region as a member of a different tribe because he married the only daughter of the leader of the strongest tribe in the northern region. Kill them all, Mo Xiaoyao said calmly. Yes, Prince. After sending Xue Jing away, the room became quiet again. Mo Xiaoyao stared blankly at Yi Li's sleeping face. He lowered his head and kissed her gently. Li, wake up. You don't know how scared I am when I see you lying here like this. If you don't wake up, I'm afraid that I won't be able to control myself and turn the entire West Hill into hell. I know. I know you don't like this, so wake up quickly. In the Emperor of Shiling's palace, the Emperor of Shiling sat paralyzed on the dragon throne. His face was pale, and he seemed to have no strength left in his body. The scene outside the flower garden today had not only shocked all the nobles of West Hill, but even he, the ruler of a country, was shocked. He saw the white-haired man in white sitting at the door looking at the person in front of him with a calm expression, as if he was neither happy nor angry. But every word that came out of his mouth was like a cloud of smoke, leaving a trail of blood behind. It was as if he could decide the life and death of the people at will. This was the state that the Emperor of Shiling yearned for the most. As an emperor, he could decide the life and death of the people at will. But now, he began to doubt if he could really do it. Could he kill almost half of the nobles without batting an eyelid like Mo Xiaoyao? The Emperor of Shiling shook his head weakly. He could not. Not only could he not, but even Lei Jinting could not do it. No matter how powerful they were, they could not be as decisive as Mo Xiaoyao and as cold as him, Your Majesty. The servant in front of him looked worriedly at the Emperor of Shiling. His Majesty had been in a daze ever since he returned from outside the palace, but he refused to summon an imperial physician. He could not help but worry these people who were close to him. But when he thought of the scene in the morning, he felt that His Majesty's behavior was normal. Even people like them who had seen too much darkness and blood were still trembling at this moment. How is Princess Lingyun? After a long while, the Emperor of Shiling asked in a low voice. Although he had never been close to his daughter, the Emperor of Shiling did not have many children. Princess Lingyun was one of the more outstanding ones. Now that she had died like this, it was impossible to say that he was not sad at all. But no matter how sad he was, as a father, he did not have the ability and courage to seek justice for his daughter. The servant said carefully, the princess's body has been sent back to her residence. The Ministry of Rites has chosen an auspicious day to bury the princess. Your Majesty, please take care of your body. Chapter 705. The Emperor of Shiling smiled helplessly and said, Never mind. Compared to those people, at least she didn't suffer much. Tell the Ministry of Rites to prepare the princess's funeral as soon as possible. Let's head to An City in advance. Whether it was because he felt that he had failed and couldn't face it, or because he was afraid of the Mahist army and Prince Ding, the Emperor of Shilin didn't have the slightest bit of fear towards the imperial city anymore. This old servant obeys. Your Majesty, news just came from outside the palace. The concubine sons of Prince Rui in Jinan Palace are all dead. After thinking for a while, the Chamberlain felt that he should tell the Emperor some good news. The Emperor of Shilin opened his eyes. Oh. Really? It's absolutely true. I'm afraid this matter is related to the South vanquishing king. Prince Ding destroyed Genin of Gojoseon and Prince Rui's mansion in a fit of anger. Not a single one of them was left alive. At this point, the old Chamberlain couldn't help but shiver. The Emperor of Shilin was stunned for a while before he chuckled and said, Enchanting, how could he have foreseen this day? Forget it, at least. Enchanting's forces were all destroyed by Mo Xiuyao. Let's leave the imperial city and head to An City as soon as possible. Tell them not to provoke this fiend anymore. This old servant obeys. When Yili woke up, it was already 3 days later. Although 3 days wasn't a long time, the Prince Ding mansion's efficiency had always been high. Therefore, in these 3 days, the remaining forces in and out of the imperial city had all been wiped out by Qin Feng, Feng Zhiyao, and the others. As for how many people's families and businesses had been destroyed and how many people's heads had fallen, it wasn't something that ordinary people could know. But even so, many people noticed that many familiar faces in the imperial city had disappeared overnight. It was not easy to live peacefully in this chaotic world. Even if they had any doubts, they would quietly suppress them to the bottom of their hearts. Fourth brother. Fourth brother. Yili suddenly opened her eyes and grabbed the wrist of the person in front of her. When she saw the person sitting by the bed clearly, she was slightly startled. Eldest aunt, it was first Madam of the Su family who was sitting by the bed. She was holding a warm handkerchief in her hand and was about to wipe her sweat when Yili suddenly grabbed it. She was also shocked. You're finally awake. Seeing that she had woken up, First Madam of the Su family was also delighted, and a relieved smile appeared on her gentle unloving face. She had traveled thousands of miles to the West Hill for her son. Other than the time when she traveled from Yunzhou to Li City, this was the first time Madame Su had traveled so far in her life. Unexpectedly, when he arrived at Glass City, his son and niece were both unconscious on the bed. If it weren't for Feng Zhiyao, who went to greet them, telling them to take care of themselves, Madame Su would have fainted from fright. Eldest aunt. Having just woken up, Yili's mind was in a mess for a moment. She suddenly remembered the scene before she fainted and couldn't help but sit up. Eldest aunt, fourth brother. Madame Su hurriedly held her down and said, It's okay, your fourth brother is fine. Why are you so careless? I'm sorry. Eldest aunt, fourth brother did it because of me. Thinking of how fourth brother threw himself in front of her and how the sword pierced through her chest, Yili's face turned pale. Fourth brother was a weak scholar who didn't even have the strength to truss a chicken. Yili didn't dare to imagine how bad the situation was. Thinking of her son who was still lying motionless on the bed, Madame Su's eyes couldn't help but redden. Seeing her son wrapped in a thick white gauze and his pale face, how could Madame Su, as a mother, not be heartbroken? But how could this kind of thing be blamed on Yili? How could she, as a mother, not know her son's nature? Even if it wasn't for Yili, Su Qingbai would still throw himself at any one of the brothers. It would be strange if her son didn't block that sword. Madame Su patted the back of Yili's hand and said gently, Silly child, your fourth brother is fine. Why are you crying? I'm talking about you. Didn't you learn some medical skills from Dr. Lin? How come you don't even know that you're not feeling well? Yili was stunned. Madame Su shook her head with a smile and said, Silly child, you're already 3 months pregnant. You even gave birth to a child. How could you not pay attention at all? This time, Yili was completely stunned. Even when Madame Sue raised her hand to wipe her tears, she didn't come back to her senses. After a long while, she lowered her head and reached out to touch her flat stomach. Then she put her left hand on her right hand's pulse and said in a panic, I can't feel it. What's wrong with the child? Although Yili had learned some medical skills from Dr. Lin, most of them were about pharmacology and poisons. And medical skills were obviously not a subject that could be understood by analogy. It was difficult for a person who had studied medicine for less than half a year to clearly distinguish between a slippery pulse and pregnancy. Not to mention, Yili was a little panicked at this moment. People like Mo Xiaoyao couldn't even feel a pulse in a panic, let alone diagnose it. Madame Su comforted her with a smile, "It's okay. The child is fine. It's just that you're too careless. If something happens, it won't be just your problem." Yili looked down at her stomach in a daze. This time, she was indeed careless. Although she had experienced it once before, this time, except for the ups and downs of her mood, the child had been very well behaved. Basically, it didn't cause her any physical discomfort. And there was a 2-day period every month. Because of the great loss when she gave birth to Mo and Xiaobao, although she carefully recuperated, there were always times when it wasn't accurate. Therefore, she only thought that it was because of the soil and water in West Hill that she was temporarily disrupted. Also, there hadn't been any news in the past few years. Yili almost habitually stopped thinking about it. Anyway, it's good that you're awake. I haven't sent someone to inform Prince Ding yet. Madame Su smiled. Yili. Before she finished speaking, Mo Xiaoyao's voice came from outside the door. Mo Xiaoyao's white figure swept into the room, startling Madame Su. Obviously, he didn't know who reported it, so he directly used his lightness skill to run over. Xiaoyao. Yili looked up at the white-haired man in front of her. Although he didn't look bad, Yili could feel his tension and fatigue. The white figure flashed, and Yili was pulled into a cool embrace. Mo Xiaoyao buried his head in her shoulder, deeply inhaling the familiar fragrance. His voice was low and hoarse. Yili. You're finally awake. Yili's heart ached inexplicably. She raised her hand to wrap around his thin waist and said in a low voice, "I'm sorry to have made you worry." Not far away, Madame Su looked at the young couple in front of her with a gratified smile. She quietly retreated, leaving space for the young couple to talk. Leaning into Mo Xiaoyao's embrace, Yili softly spoke of her expectations and love for her upcoming baby. Mo Xiaoyao hugged Yili and silently listened. After a while, Yili finally stopped and let out a soft sigh. Raising her head to look at the person hugging her, she saw that he had already closed his eyes and fallen asleep. There was a faint shadow under his closed eyes. Yili carefully lifted her hand to seal 2 of his pressure points. Just now, she carefully got up to make room for him to lie on the bed. Then, she pulled the blanket over him and carefully covered him. Looking at the handsome face of the person in deep sleep, Yili faintly smiled. In this world, the only person who could successfully seal Prince Ding's pressure points was probably her, right? In the relay station, naturally, everyone was happy because Yili and Su Qingbai had woken up. However, on the other side of the imperial city, the Bai family was in a state of panic and gloominess. Bai Yunqing fell into a chair in the hall. His face, which was already old, now looked even more haggard. Originally, after knowing that his daughter had been killed by Prince Ding, although Bai Yunqing was angry and heartbroken, he still had some confidence. In his heart, he secretly planned everything. However, he did not expect Prince Ding to be so ruthless. In just a short 2 to 3 days, he had wiped out all the forces in the imperial city. Even the Jinan Palace had been destroyed by him. Bai Yunqing's only hope, the Emperor of Xiling, was also scared out of his wits by Mo Xiuyao. He said that there was no need to wait for 2 months. After the palace was tidied up, he would immediately leave for An City. The Bai family, who had previously openly submitted to the Prince Ding mansion, was naturally abandoned by the Emperor of Xiling without hesitation. If it was a few years ago, when the Empress and Imperial concubine Qingrong were still alive, the Emperor of Xiling would have to give some face to Bai Yunqing. However, Imperial concubine Qingrong had been missing for a long time and the Empress had long passed away. The Emperor of Xiling naturally would not protect the Bai family, who were useless and disloyal to him. Perhaps, from the beginning, submitting to the Prince Ding mansion was already a mistake. Bai Yunqing thought bitterly. Not submitting to the Prince Ding and following the Emperor of Xiling to An City, even if the Bai family could not prosper, with the Bai family's background, at least they would not be killed. But now, thinking of the scene outside the Sun family's garden that day, Bai Yunqing only felt a chill in his heart. Prince Ding, would he really give the Bai family a way out? Master, what do we do now? Madame Bai also looked haggard. Even her usual makeup could not hide the wrinkles and panic on her face. What do we do? What do we do? How do I know what to do? Bai Yunqing smiled bitterly. Chapter 707. The more Bai Yunqing thought about it, the more he felt that it was possible. He nodded and said, Madam is right. Madam, rest well these few days and don't worry. I'll arrange the meeting with Princess Ding. Then I'll have to trouble you. Madame Bai said with a smile. A trace of resentment flashed through her slightly lowered eyes. Not long after the news of the Mahist army occupying the imperial city reached the Dechu state, came the news that Mo Xiuyao had almost massacred the West Hill bigwigs. Enchanting, who was leading the Eastern Army all the way to the south, had yet to recover from the blow of the imperial city's fall when he heard the news. Another bigger blow came head-on, almost making him dizzy and disoriented. Since he had given up on returning to the west, the fall of the imperial city was almost a foregone conclusion. Although Enchanting did not expect it to be so fast, he was still mentally prepared. However, Mo Xiuyao's ruthless purging of the imperial city's bigwigs was completely out of Enchanting's expectations. As a result, Enchanting's many years of connections in the imperial city, and even the families of his generals, were all implicated. Not to mention, there were also his own grandchildren among them. Hearing this news, Enchanting was so angry that he almost fainted on the spot. He gritted his teeth and squeezed out a few words, Mo Xiuyao, Prince. The guard beside him quickly reached out to support him. Enchanting raised his hand to cover his mouth. Bright red blood seeped out from between his fingers. Prince, please take care of yourself. Everyone present was shocked. They did not have time to be angry or sad. They hurried forward to check on Enchanting. Although their journey had been smooth and they had occupied a large part of the Dechu state's land. However, because of Murongshan's interference, they did not manage to occupy the entire south as expected before Mo Jingli moved south. The current situation in Dechu state could be said to be a mess. Most of the south of the Cloud Mist River was in Mo Jingli's hands, and a small portion of it was occupied by them. The Xiling army controlled part of the north of the Yunlan River, but behind them was Murongshan's army, which had just moved north. Although there were only 200,000 people, it was enough to cause them a lot of trouble as they continued to move south. Further southwest was Lu Songxian's 400,000-strong army. Further north was the territory of the Northwest Mahist army. Further north was the Dechu state's garrison, which was left behind to guard the northern Jin and the northern tribes, who were in a chaotic battle. It could be said that there wasn't a single place in the Dechu state that wasn't in chaos. At this time, Genom of Gojosian absolutely couldn't allow any accidents to happen. Enchanting steadied his mind and suppressed the sweetness that rushed up to his throat. He waved away the guard who was supporting him and said in a deep voice, "I am fine. You can leave first." Everyone looked hesitantly at Enchanting's ashen face and finally left the study. What exactly is going on? After a while, Enchanting's voice sounded in the study. The man who came to deliver the message didn't look too good either. In a deep voice, he recounted everything that had happened in the Emperor of Xiling City. From Su Qingbai's advance to the Imperial City, to the Emperor of Xiling's willingness to give up the Imperial City, to the assassination of Princess Ding, to Prince Ding's anger and bloodshed in the Sun family's garden. Idiot! After listening to the man's report, Enchanting could only squeeze out these two words. Even his breathing gradually became coarse. That idiot! I should have crippled him back then. Why didn't he think that those who died were not only I's trusted subordinates, but also the elites of Xiling? These people were killed by Mo Xiuyao. I'm afraid he's still secretly happy in his heart, right? Why didn't he think that these people are all dead? Xiling, does he have the ability to govern Xiling alone? Enchanting's voice gradually became louder. It was obvious that he was extremely angry. Enchanting's words were indeed correct. Although those who were killed were Enchanting's men, it should be known that Enchanting had been in control of the imperial court for more than 10 years. How many of the capable people in the imperial court were not his men? After being killed by Mo Xiuyao, those who remained were just a bunch of mediocre people. Even if the Emperor of Xiling moved the capital to An City, the Emperor of Xiling, who had no experience in governing a country, brought a bunch of mediocre people with him. Only heaven knew what they could do. Hee hee. Mo Xiuyao, what a good move, what a good scheme. Enchanting laughed coldly. After venting some of his anger, Enchanting quickly calmed down. He also quickly realized that something was amiss. His sharp eyes narrowed slightly, and he asked in a low voice, "I don't remember when I gave the order to assassinate Princess Ding. Who acted on their own initiative?" The man was also at a loss. He was just an extremely inconspicuous person that Genom of Gojosian had placed in the Imperial City. Usually, he was only in charge of some news from the marketplace. That was why he was able to escape the calamity at the Prince Ding mansion and hurried over to deliver the news. However, he also did not understand the cause of this matter and only thought that it was an order from the prince. Seeing that he was at a loss, Enchanting also knew that he would not be able to get anything out of him. He waved his hand and dismissed him. After the man left, Enchanting waved his hand and swept the ink slab on the table to the ground. The ink slab made a crisp sound as it hit the ground. Even the good quality ink slab was smashed into pieces. Investigate. Who is so daring? Mo Jingli. No, Mo Jingli does not have this ability. Investigate Rin Qining, Yelu Hong, and Yelu Yi for I. Yes, Prince. The gold-robed guards who were hidden in the shadows answered and left. Only Enchanting was left in the study room. Enchanting was silent for a long time. Finally, he spat out a mouthful of blood. Northwest Feihong Pass. Young Master Qing Qin, dressed in a spotless white robe, stood on top of the gate tower of Feihong Pass and looked out. Not far away was the main camp of the Xiling army and the Northern Tribes army. Looking up from the bottom of the pass, the handsome young master in white stood in the wind. His expression was calm and tranquil, like a celestial being. Not to mention the soldiers of the two armies, even the commanders of the two armies could not help but sigh at young Master Qing Chen's elegance. Oh. Qing Bai is injured. On the gate tower, Su Qingchen turned around and looked at the shadow guard who came to deliver the message. He raised his eyebrows slightly. The shadow guard felt his heart skip a beat and a chill run down his spine. Although young Master Qing Chen was known as the Celestial Young Master and was not as imposing as Prince, the pressure he gave off was indeed the same. Young Master, it is indeed so. But, the letter also said that fourth young master did not suffer any vital injuries. I think he should have woken up by now. Su Qingchen nodded and said, I understand. You may go. The shadow guard secretly wiped his sweat and cupped his hands. This subordinate will take his leave. Young Master Qingchen, do you really think that Lei Zhenting sent someone to assassinate Princess Ding? Lei Zhenting should not be so unwise. The two men beside Su Qingchen also stood in the wind. One of them had white hair. Although his expression was gentle, there was a hint of determination between his brows. The other middle-aged man was in his early 30s. He looked calm and was somewhat similar to the old man. These two people were the Southern Marquis's son and son who were almost killed by Mo Jingqi. At that time, the two of them almost lost their lives because of Mo Jingqi's persecution. Although Mo Xiuyao and Yi Li saved them, they were somewhat disheartened. These years, they lived in seclusion in the northwest and did not have much reputation. But now that Mo Jingqi was dead, the Dechu state was almost dead. The northwest was also facing the pressure of the western hill and the northern tribes. The southern marquis and his son naturally could not sit still. They took the initiative to accompany Su Qingchen to Feihong Pass. Chapter 708. Su Qingchen's handsome face turned cold. Even if it wasn't Lei Zhenting's idea, he still can't get away with it. Although Marquis Nan had spent the rest of his life as a coward, he was still a fierce general who had once galloped on the battlefield. As an outsider, he could see things more clearly. He stroked his beard and smiled. This time, I'm afraid that Lei Zhenting was also schemed against. Genom of Gojosian's loss this time was not small. Genom of Gojosian was probably vomiting blood from the heartache right now. Prince Ding had been in hiding for many years, but every time he made a move, it was enough to shock the world. Fu Zhao, who was standing behind his father, asked worriedly, Prince Ding's actions might affect the prince's reputation. Even though they were far away in the northwest, Prince Ding's name had spread throughout the entire northwest. There was no need to doubt other places as well. As people from the Prince Ding mansion, they naturally knew that the number of people Prince Ding had killed was not as many as the rumors said. However, the influence of these people was more serious than if he had really massacred an entire city. Now, the rumors outside had become that Prince Ding had massacred the entire emperor of Xiling City. Even the matter that had been suppressed in Bian City had been brought up. For a time, many scholars had a bad impression of Prince Ding. However, the Su family, who held the most power in the northwest and was the leader of the humanities in the northwest, did not say anything. This made Fu Zhao somewhat puzzled. Su Qingchen smiled faintly. Brother Fu, you still don't see it clearly. As the saying goes, preventing people from talking is more important than preventing a river from flowing. It's better to let it out than to block it. When they say they are satisfied, they will naturally stop talking. Won't this affect Prince Ding's reputation? Fu Zhao frowned and asked. People who wanted to rule the world would always pay more attention to their reputation. Su Qingchen turned to look at Marquis Nan and asked, Marquis Nan, what do you think? Marquis Nan shook his head and said, the winner is the king and the loser is the thief. A short message is nothing. Moreover, rumors were just rumors. Once the rumors were dispelled, the world would only respect Prince Ding even more. As for those nerds who have become stupid from reading too much, I'm sure Master Prince Ding won't care about them. Su Qingchen nodded and said with a smile, Marquis Nan is right. Given the relationship between the Su family and the Prince Ding mansion, unless it is absolutely necessary, the Su family won't easily speak up for Prince Ding. What's more, now that the world is in chaos, Prince Ding's reputation is not bad. At the very least, there were more people who were afraid of Mo Xiaoyao than those who dared to scheme against him, and there were fewer people who dared to betray the Prince Ding mansion. Sometimes, fear was also a very good way to control people. Of course, he couldn't go overboard. Wasn't the assassination attempt on Princess Ding a very good reason? In the future, Li He would be safer, right? After this, the world should know that even if Prince Ding was deeply in love with the princess, if something happened to Princess Ding, Master Prince Ding wouldn't collapse or fall. He would only become crazier and more cold-blooded. Now, Prince Ding is still in West Hill. When Prince Ding returns to Glass City, will there be any accidents in West Hill? Marquis Nan asked worriedly. Su Qingchen said, Qingbai is still a little young. However, after this lesson, he should understand what it means to use severe measures in troubled times. Marquis Nan and his son couldn't help but look at each other. Fu Zhao raised his eyebrows and looked at Su Qingchen curiously. Master Qingchen, you don't seem to feel sorry for those nobles in West Hill. Although many of them were related to assassins, everyone knew that most of them were the confidants of Genom of Gojoseon and the truly talented people in West Hill. Prince Ding's action had cut off the talents in West Hill for the next 10 years. Su Qingchen smiled coldly. As long as Prince Ding doesn't kill the common people, as for those people, how many of them are truly innocent? Even if they are innocent. Looking out of the pass, the land outside Feihong Pass was barren and broken walls and wails could be heard everywhere. Su Qingchen raised his hand and pointed to a place far away. Is there anyone more innocent than them? The truly innocent were the common people struggling in the war. It wasn't suitable for the nobles who started the war. Marquis Nan sighed softly. Master Qingchen is right. Looking into the distance, those places used to be his homeland. But now, there were wails everywhere and rivers of blood flowed. Su Qingchen raised his eyebrows slightly and said lightly, if it's not Genom of Gojoseon's idea, then there's only one person who has the ability to do so. Ren Qining. Very good, if I don't do something to repay him, wouldn't Qingbai and Li He's suffering be in vain? Someone come. A man in black appeared behind Su Qingchen. It was Wei Lin, who had been left behind by Yi Li in the northwest. Wei Lin, go to the Chu capital personally. Tell Lang Haoyu that there's no need to return to the northwest for the time being. Assist the De Chu state's army in defending the Chu capital. Su Qingchen said lightly. Wei Lin didn't ask any more questions. He nodded and said in a low voice, I understand. I'll take my leave. Master Qingchen, defending the Chu capital is a little. Marquis Nan frowned. He had some understanding of the De Chu state's military strength and combat power. Chapter 709. Hearing Su Qingchen's words, Marquis Nan and his son were also shocked. The Prince Ding mansion and the De Chu state had been at odds for so many years, but there was still an ambush in the De Chu state. Even now, the De Chu state was in chaos and war, but it was still not exposed. This made the two of them marvel at the power of the Prince Ding mansion. However, both of them knew their limits. Since Su Qingchen did not elaborate, they would not ask. Marquis Nan looked at the fluttering banners not far from the pass and asked, how do you plan to deal with the Northern Tribes army and the Xiling army outside the pass? Su Qingchen said indifferently, the Northern Tribes are bent on conquering the territory of the De Chu state. They will not fight us head-on. As for the Xiling army, they were just following behind the Northern Tribes army and waving their flags and shouting. Since that's the case, let's take down these two groups of people together. Marquis Nan looked at Su Qingchen and asked, are you confident? Su Qingchen smiled and said, marching to war is Marquis Nan's business. How can you ask me if I have confidence? I am ashamed to say that I am able to come up with a plan or two, but I am not good at military matters. Marquis Nan smiled and said, young master is too modest. Just based on Su Qingchen's plan, he could not be considered someone who did not know anything about military matters. However, compared to young master Qing Chen's literary talent, this point was not so conspicuous. I am not modest. For this battle, I will have to trouble Marquis Nan and General Liu. Su Qingchen said seriously. Knowing that Qing Chen was entrusting the Feihong Pass and the soldiers of the Mo family army to him, Nan Ho's heart warmed. He said seriously, please rest assured, young master Qing Chen. This old man will not dare to slack off. That is good. Su Qingchen nodded and smiled. Let the northern tribes see if the Mahist army, which has not fought for many years, is inferior to them. It was a simple and casual sentence, but it caused a sense of pride to rise in Nan Ho's heart. Although he had fought many battles in the first half of his life, he had never thought that he would be able to lead the Mahist army against the northern tribes and the western hills. On this day, outside the city of the Emperor of Xiling, there was a surge of people, and the atmosphere was awe-inspiring. The soldiers of the Mo family army, dressed in black, had already replaced the original soldiers of the West Hill and stood on the city wall. This also meant that the Emperor of Shiling's city now belonged to the Mahist army. Outside the city gate, a bright yellow flag embroidered with dragon patterns fluttered in the wind. Rows of carriages of all kinds were lined up by the side of the road outside the imperial city, waiting for the time to set off. Today was the day when the Emperor of Xiling officially left the imperial city for An City. Many nobles and ministers left with the West Hill. As for the common people, although there were some who left with the Emperor of Xiling, there were not many of them. For the common people, loyalty to the Emperor of Xiling and patriotism were very far away from them. Furthermore, the Emperor of Shiling's city was not forcefully conquered by the Mahist army, but was given up by the Emperor of Xiling. Thus, there were naturally fewer common people who were willing to follow the Emperor of Xiling. The Mahist army had always had a good reputation. Rather than follow the Emperor of Xiling and give up the place they had lived and worked for generations to go to an unknown place, it was better to live peacefully under the command of the Prince Ding mansion. Thus, in the packed crowd outside the city, there were more people who came to see them off or to watch the show than those who wanted to follow them. This made the Emperor of Xiling feel somewhat desolate, but the common people were the most common people in the world. The Emperor of Xiling naturally did not think much of them. Prince Ding, Wang Fei is here. The Emperor of Xiling was going to leave. Mo Xiuyao and Yili naturally had to come to see him off. Fortunately, after a few days of rest, Yili had recovered greatly. But Su Qingbai was still lying in bed and unable to move. Mo Xiuyao wrapped an arm around Yili's waist and protected her in his arms, not avoiding the gazes of the people around them. But Yili found to her shock that the people around them, especially the high officials and nobles, did not have the usual respectful and fawning expressions when they saw them, but were filled with extreme fear. When she looked closely, she found that these people's fearful gazes were not directed at her, but at the people around her. She couldn't help but raise her head to look at Mo Xiuyao in puzzlement. Because Yili was pregnant, and Mo Xiuyao faintly found that Yili did not like him killing wantonly, or Mo Xiuyao himself was not willing to let Yili know of his personality. A few days after Yili woke up, the people around her did not tell her what had happened while she was unconscious. Yili naturally did not know why these people were so fearful. Your Majesty, I wish Your Majesty a safe journey. Mo Xiuyao raised his hands in a salute to the Emperor of Xiling and said with a laugh. The Xiling Emperor could not help but be stunned. He actually felt a little overwhelmed by the favor. He hurriedly returned the greeting and said, I accept Prince Ding's auspicious words. Shen also congratulates Prince Ding and Wang Fei on the birth of a son. Yili nodded with a faint smile and said, Many thanks, Your Majesty. Take care, Your Majesty. Even though the feeling of having to smile at this person who had taken over a large portion of his land and imperial city was very bitter, but fortunately, he was about to leave this place and completely leave Mo Xiuyao, the god of death. This caused the Emperor of Shiling's smile to become more sincere. He said with a smile, "Many thanks, Wang Fei. Zhen will leave." Mo Xiuyao smiled faintly and said, "I won't see you out." The Emperor of Shiling's dragon sedan stopped in the middle of the road not far away, surrounded by the palace guards and palace maids. Behind the dragon sedan were the carriages of the imperial concubines, princesses, and members of the imperial family. Seeing the Emperor of Shiling being helped onto the dragon sedan, the others followed and prepared to depart. After the dragon sedan started to move, Mo Xiuyao waved his hand to the people who had come to see him off and said, "All right, you can all leave." Supporting Yili, he turned to return to the city. The people behind him were silent. "Prince, you should at least act more realistically. Even if you don't watch him leave, at least don't hurry to turn and leave before the Emperor of Shiling's dragon sedan has even taken a step away." But the generals of the Mahist army naturally had no objections. The original nobles of Shiling were also not in the mood to show respect to their old master in front of their new master. After a moment of silence, they all left. Princess Ding, concubine requests an audience with Princess Ding. Yili and Mo Xiuyao were just about to enter the city when they heard a sharp cry from behind them. Yili turned and saw Madame Bai rushing towards her with an anxious expression. Unfortunately, after the assassination attempt, Yili's guards had all been replaced by Qi Lin after Yili woke up. While Yili was not willing to do this, she knew that the incident this time must have frightened many people. So she did not object. She just thought of it as reassuring those who cared about her. Madame Bai had just called out Princess Ding when she was stopped by the guards of the Prince Ding mansion. She was still a dozen steps away from Yili. Seeing that Yili was about to be helped into the city by Mo Xiuyao, Madame Bai was unwilling and shouted, "Wang Fei, concubine requests an audience with Wang Fei." Everyone present was silent. Of course they knew about the Bai family. The daughter of the Bai family had been killed by Prince Ding that day. Many people guessed when the Prince Ding mansion planned to move against the Bai family. Chapter 7:10. Yili frowned slightly. She thought for a while and said, "Invite Madame Bai to the post house." The guard behind her responded, picked up Madame Bai, and disappeared in front of everyone. The Emperor of Shiling left, leaving behind an empty palace. The West Hills Palace was smaller than the Dechu State's palace and the former Imperial Palace in the south of Dechu State. But no matter how small it was still a palace. And Mo Xiuyao obviously had no intention of moving to West Hill, so the disposal of the palace became a problem. Throughout history, the former imperial palaces were either used as new imperial palaces or as temporary palaces. Or they were left abandoned for a long time and gradually destroyed. However, this was not in line with King Ding's way of doing things. In the end, Mo Xiuyao thought about it and decided that the front half of the palace would be scrapped of those things that were specially used by the emperor, and it would become the highest administrative yamen in Shiling Imperial City in the future. The second half, the harem, would be closed for the time being. They would make plans in the future. Because they were leaving West Hill soon, Mo Xiuyao and Yili did not plan to move into the palace and have fun living there. After sending off the Emperor of Shiling, they returned to the post house where they were temporarily staying. The first thing Yili and Mo Xiuyao did after returning to the post house was to visit Su Qingbai, who was still recuperating. Although Su Qingbai's vital parts were not injured, his injuries were still very serious. After a few days of recuperation, he could only sit on the bed and talk to them while leaning on a pillow. When Yili went in, Madame Su was feeding Su Qingbai medicine. Su Qingbai could not help but feel a little uncomfortable. He was already so old, and his hand was not injured. It was always uncomfortable for his mother to feed him medicine personally. Seeing Yili and Imo Xiuyao come in, his eyes lit up as if he had seen his saviors. How could Madame Su not know what he was thinking? She snorted unhappily and said, "No matter who it is, finish the medicine first." Su Qingbai said helplessly, "Mother, pass me the bowl. I can drink it myself." He could even hold the bowl and drink it in one gulp, one mouthful at a time. One had to know that the taste of medicinal soup had never been good. Mrs. Su looked at him with a faint smile and said, "Now you know that the medicine is bitter. Then shouldn't he recuperate properly? Do you think I don't know that you read those files again last night?" These words made Yili feel a little guilty. If they had not been in a hurry to leave West Hill, fourth brother would not have had to worry about recuperating. Finally, Madame Su had enough of seeing her son's handsome face turn bitter. She handed the pill to him. Su Qingbai hurriedly took the bowl and gulped it down. He cried and frowned. Mrs. Su angrily stuffed a candied fruit into his mouth, then took the empty bowl and left. Fourth young Master Su was a little embarrassed to be seen in such an embarrassing state by his cousin and cousin-in-law. He smiled at them and said, "Has the Emperor of Xiling left?" Yili nodded and sat down by the bed. She carefully looked at Su Qingbai's complexion and found that it was better than yesterday. She said, "We just sent him away. Fourth brother, are you in a hurry to look at those things again? Rest well before your injuries are healed. If something really happens, don't you still have Xiao Yao and Feng San?" Su Qingbai smiled and said, "I've been lying in bed for so many days. It's quite boring to do nothing. I'm just looking around." Su Qingbai glanced at Imo Xiuyao, who was sitting on a stool, and asked, "When do you plan to go back?" Now that the Dechu state was in a mess, it was a good time for them to annex West Hill. But West Hill was vast. Although it was so easy to fall into the hands of the Emperor of Xiling this time, there was an element of luck in it. If they really wanted to take over the entire West Hill, 3 to 5 years wouldn't be a long time. If the northern tribes and Enchanting were to gain a foothold in the Dechu state, then the losses would outweigh the gains. After all, no matter how big West Hill was, it couldn't compare to the rich land of the Dechu state. Imo Xiuyao said seriously, "In half a month. Li is pregnant, so the journey will be slower. We can't stay for long." Su Qingbai nodded and calculated, "Half a month is enough. I should be able to get out of bed by then." Imo Xiuyao said, "I've already sent a message to Shenyang. He should be able to sense it before we leave." Su Qingbai was stunned. He shook his head and smiled, "There's no need for that. Mr. Shen still has to take care of Li." Yili pressed him down and frowned, "Why is there no need? I'm only pregnant. It's not like I'm injured. Childbirth requires a midwife, not a doctor. Besides, do you think Glass City doesn't have a doctor? If you don't take good care of yourself, First Aunt will be very sad." Su Qingbai still wanted to say something, but Yili glared at him and said firmly, "You're not allowed to object. Mr. Shen has already said that he's been annoyed by being trapped in Glass City for the past few years. It's a good thing to be able to go out and take a walk. Moreover, West Hill is a place that just fell into our hands. As the saying goes, a strong dragon can't suppress a snake in its old haunts. With a doctor with great medical skills, we'll be more at ease." Su Qingbai knew that he couldn't win against Yili. He could only smile helplessly and agree. Imo Xiuyao continued, "The other 300,000 soldiers will remain in West Hill. The commander will be Zhang Qilan. Zhang Qilan's personality is straightforward, but he's not obstinate and self-opinionated. There shouldn't be any problems between the two of you. What do you think?" Su Qingbai naturally didn't have any objections. Although the Maoist army had taken over West Hill, Su Qingbai didn't think that it would be peaceful just like that. Zhang Qilan was also a veteran of the Maoist army. He had rich experience in leading troops. Su Qingbai naturally felt more at ease with him leading the 300,000 soldiers. Yili thought of Lady Su and quickly asked, "Does First Aunt want to go back with us?" Su Qingbai smiled helplessly and shook his head. "Mother knows that I'm going to stay in West Hill. I'm afraid she's planning to stay here for a while." In fact, Lady Su's original words were, "I can't control your elder brother. Your younger brother is younger than you. If I don't see you get married and have children, I won't return to the Su family." Lady Su's standards for her daughter-in-law had been lowered from a scholarly family into Chu state to a clean family background and a good mood. Looking at Su Qingbai's helpless expression, Yili could also imagine what Lady Su had said. She pondered for a while and agreed with a smile, "Since that's the case, First Aunt must be worried about fourth brother. It won't hurt to stay in West Hill for a while. When First Aunt misses us, she can send someone to welcome us." Mo Xiuyao didn't have any objections. He nodded and said, "That's great. In half a month, Li and I will return to Glass City. I'll leave everything here to you." Su Qingbai hesitated for a while, but still expressed his worries. He said, "I don't have much experience before, I'm afraid." Mo Xiuyao frowned and thought for a while. He understood Su Qingbai's worries. Su Qingbai was only 24 or 25 this year, but he was already in charge of 1/3 of West Hill's territory. He could be said to be the most powerful of the feudal officials. It was normal for him to be unable to convince the masses in a short period of time. He believed in Su Qingbai's abilities, but abilities needed time to show. After they left the imperial city, Su Qingbai's life wouldn't be so easy. Previously, he only considered abilities and also the Prince Ding mansion. Now that there weren't enough people, he forgot to consider Su Qingbai's age. Chapter 711. Yili raised her eyebrows slightly and said with a smile, "I have an idea, but I don't know what fourth brother thinks." Su Qingbai looked at Yili with a smile. "Li Her has always come up with good ideas. Let me hear it." Yili said, "Fourth brother, why don't you try and see if you can invite Mr. Shooting from Bian City to come here? Mr. Shooting's disciples are all over West Hill. If he can come out of the mountains to help fourth brother, then fourth brother's affairs in West Hill will be much smoother." Although Mr. Shooting had already expressed his intention to pledge allegiance to the Prince Ding mansion, scholars, especially those who had extraordinary achievements, always had some strange tempers. If Yili and Mo Xiuyao asked him to come, of course he would come back. However, it was likely that he would inevitably have a knot in his heart and look down on Su Qingbai, which would be detrimental to Su Qingbai's affairs. As a descendant of the Su family, Su Qingbai naturally had some understanding of the outstanding scholars in the world. Moreover, Mr. Shooting was someone that his grandfather, father, and uncle all highly respected. After thinking for a moment, he nodded and said with a smile, "Li Er really won't disappoint fourth brother. Fourth brother knows what to do." Yili smiled faintly and said, "It's us who have troubled fourth brother. Since that's the case, Li Er won't disturb fourth brother's rest. Fourth brother, you should rest well these days." Mo Xiuyao helped Yili up and turned to leave. Before leaving, he said, "I'll have Feng Huiting come later. He can help you deal with the problems of West Hill's wealthy merchants." Su Qingbai was startled, then smiled and said, "Thank you, Prince." Watching the two leave, Su Qingbai thought for a moment and asked someone to bring a brush and ink. He first wrote a sincere invitation letter and had someone send it to Bian City. At the same time, he wondered if he had the time to personally go to Bian City. Unfortunately, he was currently injured. When Mo Xiuyao and the others left, he would have even less free time. After leaving Su Qingbai's courtyard, Yili turned around and smiled at Mo Xiuyao. "Xiuyao, thank you. Mo Xiaoyao was stunned. He lowered his head and looked at Yili gently. Thank me for what? Yili said, thank you for what you did for fourth brother. Whether it was inviting Shenyang to the West Hill or Feng Huiting, neither of these were originally part of Mo Xiaoyao's plan. This was especially true for Feng Huiting. Feng Huiting was currently busy integrating the businesses under the Prince Ding Mansion's name in the northwest. Mo Xiaoyao lowered his head and leaned his forehead against Yili's. He said softly, Su Qingbai is your fourth brother, isn't he? He saved you and our child. I should treat him better. Yili smiled and said, you've always been very good to them, I know. Although Mo Xiaoyao had always exploited her eldest brother, it was only limited to her eldest brother. He was indeed very good to the other cousins. Just like this time, before attacking the West Hill, Mo Xiaoyao had already considered letting Su Qingbai stay in the West Hill. This could be considered as paving the way for Su Qingbai's future. Su Qingbai was still too young, and had always been away from the Prince Ding Mansion's core affairs. But if he could handle the West Hill affairs properly, his future would not be lower than any of the core members of the Prince Ding Mansion. Since Li likes it, I naturally have to treat them well. Mo Xiaoyao smiled and lowered his head to gently bite her pink lips. Yili helplessly glared at him and said, then can you also treat eldest brother better? She really did not want to be stuck between the two of them as cannon fodder. Mo Xiaoyao gave a low laugh. How can Lily bear to make things difficult for your husband? Your husband is very sad. Yili rolled her eyes. How is this making things difficult? Do you have to be at odds with eldest brother? Well, it's his fault for looking so disgusting. You see, he can't even find a wife now, isn't that evidence? Mo Xiaoyao rubbed her lightly fragrant hair and said lazily. So, you are jealous that eldest brother is better looking than you? Princess consort. After leaving Su Qingbai's courtyard, the two were about to return to their rooms when Yili remembered that Madame Bai had been brought back and was waiting for an audience. So Mo Xiaoyao could only accompany Yili to see her, full of resentment. When they stepped into the reception pavilion, Madame Bai, who had been about to greet them, immediately froze. Her face was pale as she looked at Mo Xiaoyao supporting Yili in. She even forgot to go forward and bow. Yili raised an eyebrow and did not care too much about Madame Bai's lack of manners. She gave a faint smile and said, Madame Bai, is there something you want to say to this Fei? This concubine. Madame Bai looked at Mo Xiaoyao's stiff limbs as if they were frozen. She seemed to remember the countless screams from that day and her daughter's cries as she was dragged away. Her face became even uglier and her entire body began to tremble as if she was about to collapse. Madame Bai. Yili asked with a frown, is Madame not feeling well? Madame Bai jumped in fright, but she recovered and quickly said, this concubine is fine. Many thanks for Princess Consort's concern. This concubine is fine. Yili did not say anything. Madame Bai did not look like she was fine. Madame Bai came to see this Fei, is there something you want to say? Madame Bai's face was pale as she complained in her heart. Prince Ding was right in front of her. Not to mention pleading for leniency, she could not even say the usual greetings. Seeing this, Yili turned to look at Mo Xiaoyao. She saw that Mo Xiaoyao's expression was calm and his words could be considered gentle. It was clear that he was in a good mood and should not scare her. Xiaoyao. Thinking about it, Yili decided to quickly send Madame Bai away. It seems that Madame Bai has something to say to me alone. How about you go back first? Mo Xiaoyao held Yili with one hand and said, of course it's not good. If you have something to say, say it. If you don't want to say it, then say it. Isn't that right, Madame Bai? Madame Bai's body trembled and she quickly nodded, Prince is right. This concubine was confused and disturbed princess consort. This concubine will leave now. She did not wait for Yili to speak and stumbled out. Yili looked at Emo Xiaoyao in confusion. What happened? What happened? Emo Xiaoyao shrugged. Who knows? Chapter 7:12. At the mention of this, Yili was speechless. As a family that had existed for more than 200 years, there were not many outstanding talents in the family. And this family had not only prospered for 200 years, it had even been one of the most powerful families in Xiling. It had to be said that this was a kind of oddity. In other words, it was not that the Bai family did not have outstanding people, but that these people had never put their minds to where they should be. From the bottom of her heart, Yili did not wish for the Prince Ding mansion to have this so-called family of concubines for a long time. Not to mention other things, incestuous relationships would not have a good effect on the genes of the future generations. What are your plans? Do you need me to go see this Madame Bai? Yili asked. Emo Xiaoyao shook his head. No need, you should stay away from that Madame Bai. That woman is not quite right. Yili raised her eyebrows. She had just taken a few quick glances and did not see anything wrong with Madame Bai. Emo Xiaoyao snorted softly and said, she dares to ask I to stay away, but she is so scared by I that she does not dare to speak. If it is something that is important to the family, something that concerns the rise and fall of the family, she will say it even if she is scared to the point of lying on the ground. The mistress of the Bai family will not act like an ignorant commoner who forgets her boundaries. Then what does she mean? Leaning into Emo Xiaoyao's embrace, Yili said lazily. Ever since she woke up, she seemed to have become much lazier. She could not even be bothered to use her brain. Emo Xiaoyao said lightly, I don't know yet, but I will have people keep an eye on her. Okay. Yili's voice carried a faint tiredness. Emo Xiaoyao did not say anything else. He lowered his head to look at the person in his embrace who had closed her eyes and was gradually falling into a light sleep. His gaze was as gentle as water. Wang. Before Feng Zhiyao could say anything, he was stopped by a cold glare from Emo Xiaoyao. Feng Zhiyao, who happened to be lucky enough to see Prince Ding's eyes turn from extreme gentleness to biting cold in an instant, could not help but secretly curse in his heart, this is too fucking forgetting his friends when he sees a girl, forgetting his humanity when he sees the opposite sex. As if he had seen through Feng Zhiyao's thoughts, Emo Xiaoyao scoffed and carried Yili back to the room. Young Master Feng San, who had something to report, could only follow them silently. After Emo Xiaoyao had settled Yili down, he turned to leave. He glanced at Feng Zhiyao, who was standing at the door in a daze, and asked, what is it? Feng Zhiyao coughed lightly and pulled back his thoughts that had drifted to who knew where. He replied, I've already sent people to follow Madame Bai. After leaving the door, Madame Bai's expression seemed a bit off. It seems that she was half pretending to be frightened by Prince. Emo Xiaoyao was not surprised and asked, what does she want to do when she sees Madame Li? Feng Zhiyao shook his head. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully and said, a few days ago, the prince just killed her daughter. Could it be that she wants to avenge her daughter? It shouldn't be. Where did she get the courage? Avenge? Shouldn't she be looking for I? Feng Zhiyao looked at him as if he had seen a ghost. Prince, even if Madame Bai is ignorant, she should know that if she wants to touch you, even if she reincarnates 10 times, it won't be enough, right? Besides, there's a saying, if you want your enemy to be in so much pain that he wishes he was dead, you have to destroy the person he cares about the most. What? Emo Xiaoyao was silent for a while. He nodded as if he agreed with Feng Zhiyao's guess, have people watch Madame Bai for me. If she makes any moves, immediately kill her. No, have people go kill her now. Madame Li was pregnant now and it was inconvenient for her to make a move. Although the Maoist army and Qi Lin's guards were very reliable, there was nothing in this world that was absolutely safe. The safest thing was to kill all the danger before it happened. Feng Zhiyao rubbed his forehead in helplessness. Prince, your thoughts were moving too quickly. This was just this subordinate's guess. However, the prince was the most important. The prince had the final say. Feng Zhiyao thought irresponsibly. In a moment, he would have people go investigate. If Madame Bai really had any ulterior motives, it would be better to just kill her. If something really happened, he was afraid that the remaining one-third of the nobility in the imperial city would not be able to protect them. This subordinate understands. This subordinate will do it now. Mo Xiuyao nodded in satisfaction. Watching as Feng Zhiyao walked away, Mo Xiuyao suddenly called out to him and said coldly, Feng San, is I very old? Feng Zhiyao's feet staggered as he silently cursed in his heart. Actually, the one who is pregnant is not Wang Fei, but Wang Ye, you, the old man. Your temper, mood, and thoughts change a bit too quickly. How is that possible? Prince is clearly in the prime of his life. You are in the prime of your life. Look at your white hair. If you continue to flatter me, you will vomit. Mo Xiuyao nodded and said calmly, you can go. Madame Bai returned to the Fu. Before she entered the hall, Bai Yunqing came out with an anxious expression. Madam, how is it? Madame Bai looked at her husband with a strange gaze and then lowered her head. Bai Yunqing's heart jumped. He quickly pulled Madame Bai into the hall and asked, Madam, what did Princess Ding say? Madame Bai shook her head and did not speak. Bai Yunqing was very anxious and said, what does Princess Ding mean? Say something. Madame Bai said in a low voice, Prince Ding is always by Princess Ding's side. I can't see Princess Ding alone. Bai Yunqing frowned and asked, even so, you can test Prince Ding's intentions. Can't you see what those two are thinking? Madame Bai raised her head and looked at Bai Yunqing. Suddenly, she chuckled. Bai Yunqing looked at her strangely and asked, what's wrong with you? Are you not feeling well? Master. Do you still remember our Ning? Bai Yunqing was stunned. What was going on? His daughter who had just passed away had not been buried yet. How could he not remember? If it wasn't for this daughter, perhaps the Bai family would not be in such a passive situation. Now that the Emperor of Xiling had left the imperial city with his people, even if he had any thoughts, it was all for naught. Now, other than obediently following the Prince Ding mansion, they had no other choice. But before this, Bai Qingning had greatly offended Prince Ding. Bai Yunqing thought that he did not show any expression, but Madame Bai, who had been staring at him the entire time, saw the resentment in his eyes. She lowered her eyes and held back the tears in her eyes. Suddenly, Madame Bai smiled and said, Master, Prince Ding will not let us go. Bai Yunqing did not understand. He grabbed Madame Bai and asked sternly, what do you mean? What did you do? Madame Bai waved his hand away and said bitterly, I didn't do anything. I just hate myself for not being able to do anything. That's right. Today, she did want to take the opportunity to meet Yili alone and kill her to avenge her daughter. She only had one daughter, Qingning, in her life. She had spoiled her a lot and could only watch her daughter being killed by Prince Ding. Every time she closed her eyes, she seemed to hear her daughter's miserable voice echoing in her ears, Mother. Help. I don't want to die. I'm innocent. All this was because of Yili. If it wasn't for her, how could Prince Ding vent his anger on Qingning? How could her daughter die? Most importantly, Yili was Prince Ding's most beloved woman. If she died, Madame Bai could almost imagine how crazy and painful Prince Ding would be. Chapter 713. Unfortunately, everything did not go according to her plan. After the assassination attempt, Prince Ding would not allow anyone unfamiliar to get close to Princess Ding. And the moment of panic left her with a flaw. On the way back, she knew that there were people from the Prince Ding mansion following her. Although she did not know where they were, she could feel a pair of eyes staring at her all the time. She knew the Bai family was finished, and she had lost her only chance to avenge her daughter. But she was not reconciled. What is going on? Bai Yunqing asked anxiously. This was related to the life and death of the Bai family, so he could not help but worry. Madame Bai looked at him with a faint smile and said, "Didn't you want to know what I said to Princess Ding when I went to see her today?" "I didn't say anything, because I originally wanted to kill Yili, but Mo Xiuyao had been guarding by her side the whole time, and there were so many opportunities for powerful martial artists around, so I didn't have a chance." "You are crazy." Bai Yunqing stared at Madame Bai in horror. "Do you know what you are doing? Do you want to destroy the Bai family?" Madame Bai laughed, her eyes blurred. "My daughter is gone, what do I want the Bai family for?" "Master, Qing Ning is our biological daughter, she was killed by Mo Xiuyao just like that, and you did not say a word. All you think about is how to please your enemy. Do you have a heart? Every day I hear my daughter crying, saying that she was wronged, saying that she did not want to die. She wants me to avenge her." Bai Yunqing pushed her away and said coldly, "I have no heart. After all these years, the Bai family has lost more than one daughter. A few days ago, Prince Ding killed little 7, little 9, and little 12. Why don't you feel sorry for them? They are also the children of the Bai family. They are just the children of a concubine. What is there to feel sorry for? How can they be compared to my Ning er?" Madame Bai said disdainfully. Those servants were only born from a few side branches and concubines. How could they compare to her precious daughter? Her daughter could have been the empress and imperial concubine. It was all Bai Yunqing's fault. If he had not insisted on sending his daughter to the Prince Ding mansion, how could his daughter have died? "I don't want to talk to you crazy woman anymore," Bai Yunqing said with a wave of his sleeve. He never thought that the one who would drag him down at this time would be the legal wife that he had always been very satisfied with. At this time, Bai Yunqing couldn't care less about Madame Bai. He turned around and walked to the study. He had to find someone to discuss what to do next. He could only hope that this woman did not reveal any flaws for Prince Ding to see. Otherwise, the Bai family would really be finished. Seeing Bai Yunqing leave without looking back, Madame Bai didn't care. She ignored the servants' shocked gazes and messy disguises and walked back to her own courtyard. Madame Bai's room was so dim that it was a little unrealistic. After all, it was the room of the matriarch of an aristocratic family. After entering the room, Madame Bai waved the maidservant behind her away and closed the door. She walked to the innermost part of the room where the heavy curtain was lowered and lifted the curtain to reveal a pitch-black memorial tablet. The words, "Beloved Daughter" by Qingning's memorial tablet were written on it. Madame Bai looked lovingly at the memorial tablet on the table and gently stroked it. It was as if this wasn't a cold memorial tablet, but the beautiful and elegant daughter of the past. "Ning, I'm sorry. It's all Mother's fault. Mother couldn't save you. Now, I can't even take revenge for you. Good Ning, your father doesn't care about you at all. But Mother will remember you. Go reincarnate well. Mother will definitely take revenge for you. Don't enter Mother's dreams again," Madame Bai said to the memorial tablet. Gradually, her voice turned into a sobbing sound. Ever since her daughter passed away, Madame Bai hadn't had a good night's sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she would see all kinds of images of her daughter. The most shocking of all was her daughter's howling after being tortured. Every time, Madame Bai would be startled awake from her dreams. Ever since Bai Qingning died, Madame Bai didn't dare to look at her body. Although the servants who came to collect the body said that the young miss didn't seem to have suffered much, Madame Bai couldn't be at ease. In fact, she felt a faint sense of guilt and unease. When Prince Ding suddenly wanted to kill Bai Qingning, she was truly frightened. She didn't plead on her daughter's behalf and just watched as her daughter was dragged away. Sometimes, she even dreamed that her daughter came to her covered in blood to take her life. Under all kinds of pain and pressure, Madame Bai's hatred for the Prince Ding mansion became even more intense. As long as she killed Yili to take revenge for Qingning, Qingning would forgive her, right? Outside the door, in a hidden corner, the two shadow guards heard Madame Bai's words clearly. One of them gave a look to his companion. Young Master Feng San said that if Madame Bai had any ill intentions towards the princess consort, kill her immediately. The other person nodded expressionlessly. Of course, kill her. If she really did something, the prince would go crazy. They didn't want to suffer the prince's anger. The two guards both shivered and turned to look at Madame Bai, who was still muttering in the room. Madame Bai spoke for a long time in front of her daughter's memorial tablet before she finally stopped. When she turned around, she felt a chill in her abdomen and then a piercing pain. Chapter 7:14. Looking at Imo Xiuyao's nonchalant expression, Yili frowned slightly. After waking up, she felt that the people around her were hiding something from her. Just now, Imo Xiuyao had purposefully scared away Bai Furen, which made this feeling even stronger. Raising her head, Yili looked straight at Imo Xiuyao's slightly guilty face and asked softly, "Imo Xiuyao, are you hiding something from me?" Of course not. Why is Lili asking this?" Imo Xiuyao said with a smile. The smile on his face was not as relaxed as before. Yili raised an eyebrow and looked at him with a shadow of a smile as she asked, "Could it be that Prince Ding has taken a fancy to some family's girl and wants to bring her into the Wang Fu to give Xiao Bao a concubine?" Imo Xiuyao's expression changed slightly. His lips twitched as he pulled Yili back into his arms and said sullenly, "Li is speaking nonsense." "I only like Li." Yili patted his back in amusement and asked, "Then what is it that you have to be so secretive about?" "I haven't been feeling well these past few days. When I'm better, won't I go ask myself?" So it could be said that Master Prince Ding would do many stupid things out of concern. For example, he clearly knew that these things could not be hidden unless he killed all the people who knew about it. But unconsciously, he did not want Li to see this side of him. After a while, Imo Xiuyao said sullenly, "I killed Bai Yunqing's daughter." Yili was slightly startled. She remembered that Bai Qingning was by her side when she was attacked that day. She asked softly, "Is it because of the assassination that day?" Imo Xiuyao looked at Yili and said in a low voice, "It has nothing to do with Ali. It's this king who doesn't like her." Yili smiled helplessly and sighed softly, "Even though Bai Qingning's crime did not warrant death, but you don't have to hide this from me, right?" Even though she was not used to casually taking people's lives due to her deep-rooted beliefs in her previous life, but at least in her heart, Imo Xiuyao was thousands of times more important than the unrelated Bai Qingning, right? Moreover, after so many years, even if Yili wasn't used to it, she should also understand that sometimes, it wasn't because someone deserved to die that they were killed. There were many people who didn't deserve to die, but the number of people who didn't deserve to die was probably more than the number of people who deserved to die. In their position, many times, they did not have a choice. Imo Xiuyao looked up and stared at her. After a while, he said, "I also killed many West Hill nobles." Yili was silent for a while. Then she sighed softly and asked, "How many?" 30%, Mo Xiaoyao said indifferently. More than 30% of the nobles and the Emperor of Xiling were killed by him. The shock to the world was definitely greater than killing thousands of civilians. After a long time, Yili leaned back into Mo Xiaoyao's arms and sighed softly. "You hid it from them because of this?" Mo Xiaoyao lowered his head and stroked her hair. He said in a low voice, "Li doesn't like me killing people indiscriminately." Yili's originally heavy mood couldn't help but be happy. She looked up and glanced at him unhappily. "You also know that it is killing people indiscriminately. I am not a bodhisattva in a temple. When I really want to kill, I will not be soft-hearted. It is fine if you kill those nobles in a moment of anger or for some other reason. What did those maids and servants who didn't know anything know? It is just ruining your own reputation." Mo Xiaoyao looked at her silently. Wasn't it because he could not control himself for a moment? Seeing him like this, Yili could not be angry. She raised a hand and touched his tightly knitted brows. She said softly, "Although I do not believe in the so-called karma, but killing too much is harmful to the harmony of the world. It is easy to lose one's mind. Xiaoyao, I hope you are well." Early in Bian City, Yili had sensed that Mo Xiaoyao had a shocking murderous aura in his heart. These years, he had controlled it very well. However, the few times he lost control, the effects were already shocking enough. The reason was very likely that it was because he had forcefully suppressed the hatred between the Mahist army and the two generations of Prince Ding. Yili did not want this kind of loss of control to become normal. Otherwise, there would only be two results. One was that he would slowly calm down after releasing the murderous aura in his heart. The other was that he would lose himself in this endless killing. No matter which one it was, it would require countless people to pay the price with their lives. Li. Mo Xiaoyao looked in a daze at his wife, who was looking at him with a worried expression. He tiredly lowered his eyes and leaned on Yili's shoulder. He said in a low voice, "Li, I am so tired, don't leave me." He could see Li's worry. In fact, he also understood. For example, this time's matter. He clearly had a better way to deal with it, but at that time, he did not have any thoughts in his heart. He only wanted to kill all the people who hurt Li. Apart from this, he did not think of any other possibility. This kind of result, even if he did not think it was bad, he also understood that there were many hidden troubles. Yili reached out to hold his hand and gently placed it on her flat stomach. She said with a smile, "Why would I leave you? We still have Xiao Bao, and now we have a new baby." Mo Xiaoyao's hand that was on her stomach paused. He asked softly, "What if there is no child?" Yili smiled and said, "If you don't have a child, I'm afraid that your highness will fall for someone else, right?" Mo Xiaoyao shook his head. He raised her small chin and let her meet his eyes. He said seriously, "I do not care about children." Chapter 7:15. In the study of the Bai residence, Bai Yunqing was discussing a plan with his brothers and aides when the steward rushed in to report, "Master, Feng San and Su San are here." Bai Yunqing's heart skipped a beat. Feng Zhiyao was Mo Xiaoyao's confidant, and Su Qingfeng was the third son of the Su family, the cousin of the injured Su Qingbai. What good could it be for these two to come together? "Does Feng San have anything to say?" Bai Yunqing asked. The steward's face was pale, and he said, "Feng San said that he was ordered by the prince to see master, but he didn't go into detail. But Su San has a lot of guards behind him, and it seems they've already surrounded our residence." Hearing this, everyone in the study was shocked, and their faces turned ugly. After a while, Bai Yunqing sighed and said, "Fine, I'll go take a look." When he brought the steward to the hall, he he saw the red-clothed Feng Zhiyao and the black-clothed Su Qingfeng sitting and standing in the hall. Seeing him come out, Feng Zhiyao, who was sitting and drinking tea, stood up and smiled like a spring breeze. "Master Bai, I'm sorry to disturb you." Su Qingfeng, who was standing on the side, didn't say anything, and his face didn't look good. Bai Yunqing's smile was stiff, and he returned the greeting, "Don't mention it, Feng San and Su San are honored by your presence. Your presence brings light to our humble dwelling. Please sit down and have some tea." Su Qingfeng didn't appreciate it. "No need, this young master didn't come to drink tea." Bai Yunqing choked again. He thought that since Su Qingfeng came from the Su family, he would be like Su Qingbai. Even if he practiced martial arts, he would be gentle and polite, but he didn't expect him to be so direct and not give him any face. Feng Zhiyao didn't care, and smiled without sincerity. "Master Bai doesn't need to mind, he's in a bad mood." Bai Yunqing asked cautiously, "Is there anything I haven't done to treat you well?" Su Qingfeng sneered and said, "No one will be happy when they hear that someone wants to kill their cousin's unborn nephew." Bai Yunqing was shocked. His face paled as he forced a smile and said, "Third young master said it. This princess consort is elegant and graceful. Who dares to be so disrespectful?" Feng Zhiyao casually waved his fan and looked at Bai Yunqing with some pity. "Patriarch Bai, what Brother Su said is true. Otherwise, I wouldn't have dared to make this trip. I am here on the prince's orders, to investigate this matter." Bai Yunqing's smile had already stiffened like a mask on his face. His eyes couldn't hide the shock he was suppressing. "Young Master Feng San. What do you mean?" Feng Zhiyao didn't beat around the bush with him and said seriously, "This humble one received news that your wife wanted to kill Wang Fei." Prince Wang Fei was furious. However, the Bai family is different from others. Prince Wang Fei is still willing to give some face to Patriarch Bai. "Patriarch Bai, please ask your wife to come out and confront this humble one. If this matter is false, this humble one can go back and explain it to Prince Wang Fei." This. Bai Yunqing secretly complained in his heart. Just now, his wife confided in him, and now people from the Prince Ding mansion came to find him. Bai Yunqing couldn't tell whether Feng Zhiyao really did have some evidence, or the conversation between the Prince Ding mansion's people and his wife was overheard. Feng Zhiyao raised his eyebrows and said with a faint smile, "This is also giving Master Bai a chance to prove his innocence." For Master Bai to be evasive like this, could it be that it is not a groundless rumor? Although the Bai family has submitted to Ding Palace on the surface, in the dark, they still have a disloyal heart. How could that be? Bai Yunqing hurriedly said, "If that's the case, this humble one will ask Madam to come out." After saying that, he was about to summon people to ask Madam Bai to come out. Feng Zhiyao waved his hand and smiled, "There's no need to go through so much trouble. It's faster for us to go there personally." This. "I'm afraid the backyard is." Bai Yunqing wanted to refuse. Feng Zhiyao smiled faintly, "The people we brought with us all follow the rules. As long as Patriarch Bai's people keep their mouths shut, there won't be any rumors." Looking at the faint smile on Feng Zhiyao's face, and Su Qingfeng's cold eyes, Bai Yunqing could only give in. "So, third young Master Feng, third young Master Su, please." Bai Yunqing led the two of them straight to Madame Bai's courtyard in the backyard. Just as they walked to the entrance of the courtyard, they heard crying from inside. Bai Yunqing's heart tightened. He ignored Feng Zhiyao and Su Qingfeng and quickly walked in. As soon as he entered, he saw Madame Bai lying on the ground. Her body was covered in dark red blood, and there was a small dagger in her abdomen. Madame Bai was holding the dagger in one hand. It looked as if she had committed suicide. Bai Yunqing also recognized that the dagger was the one that Bai Qingming loved to play with. Seeing that Madame Bai had died, Bai Yunqing's first reaction was to breathe a sigh of relief. Following that, he felt a faint sadness at the death of his wife. Turning around, he saw Feng Zhiyao and Su Qingfeng walking over side by side. Bai Yunqing said sorrowfully, "Third young master Feng, third young master Su, my wife, she was killed." Feng Zhiyao wouldn't give him a chance. He frowned and said, "How could this be? Why did Madame Bai commit suicide?" Su Qingfeng crossed his arms and smiled coldly. "Naturally, she has a guilty conscience. Let's go in and see." After walking a few steps, they saw Bai Qingning's memorial tablet. In front of the tablet was a freshly burned incense stick. Feng Zhiyao turned to look at Bai Yunqing and sneered, "Master Bai, how do you explain this?" Bai Yunqing forced himself to be calm and said, "This one doesn't understand what third young master Feng means. This is my daughter's memorial tablet. What's wrong with it?" Feng Zhiyao sneered and said faintly, "Is Patriarch Bai trying to coax me, Feng San, into coming from a small family with only a few days of studying? Even if it's a memorial tablet, who would place a memorial tablet in their own bedroom?" Bai Yunqing said with a pale face, "My wife had spoiled my daughter since she was young. Now that she suddenly lost her daughter, so she harbored resentment and wanted to assassinate Princess Ding to take revenge on the Prince Ding mansion." Feng Zhiyao continued. Bai Yunqing said sternly, "Third young master Feng, this is slander." Feng Zhiyao said calmly, "Whether it is slander or not, Master Bai should explain it in front of the prince." Bai Yunqing looked at the door in panic. A group of black-clothed figures stood outside the door, making him feel a sense of despair. Under the gaze of Feng Zhiyao and Su Qingfeng, he finally lowered his head dejectedly. In September, the emperor of Xiling City was still bloody even though there was no war. After the bloodbath in the Sun family's flower garden a few days ago, the Bai family, known as the family of concubines in West Hill, also fell. Madame Bai wanted to avenge her daughter by assassinating the princess. After her plot was exposed, she committed suicide. The Bai family was also locked up. Although they were not executed immediately, the West Hill bigwigs no longer paid attention to the news of the Bai family. When the princess was assassinated, half of the emperor of Xiling City was implicated. Now that the Bai family tried to assassinate her again, did they want to implicate the remaining half of the city? Such idiots deserve to die. Who would want to have anything to do with them? Chapter 716. Sun Family. Mrs. Sun was sitting in the study with her well-behaved daughter in her arms, looking at the account books. She didn't even blink when she heard the servant report that the Bai family had been wiped out. She said lightly, "I see. You may leave." The servant who reported respectfully left. After a while, Mrs. Sun put down the book and looked up at her daughter with a faint smile. Can Xiaofu understand it? Sun Xiaofu was only a child of 7 or 8 years old. Naturally, she couldn't understand these densely packed account books. She shook her head in frustration and shyness. She whispered, "Mother, Xiaofu is so useless." Mrs. Sun smiled and gently stroked her daughter's little head. "I couldn't understand it when I was your age. Just learn slowly." Sun Xiaofu nodded obediently. She looked at her mother who had a faint expression. She hesitated, but finally asked, "Mother, are Aunt Bai and the others dead?" Although she was young, Mrs. Sun often took her daughter outside, so Sun Xiaofu still recognized most of the powerful ladies in the capital. Mrs. Sun smiled and said, "I don't know. Why would Xiaofu think they are dead?" Sun Xiaofu's little body trembled slightly. Her little hand tightly grasped Mrs. Sun's lapel and said, "Xiaofu heard that Prince Ding killed a lot of people. Sister Xiao Zhao and the others, as well as Brother Qian's family, were all killed. Little children shouldn't know what death was, but Sun Xiaofu was also present at the assassination that day. Although Mrs. Sun tried her best to protect her, Sun Xiaofu still saw the bloody corpses. So in her little heart, her friends who used to play with her died and became such broken and bloody corpses. Such a scene was indeed enough to make a 7 or 8-year-old child feel terrified. Xiaofu is afraid of Prince Ding. Mrs. Sun looked down at her daughter and sighed softly. Yes. Sun Xiaofu nodded heavily, indicating that she was very afraid of the good-looking big brother in white clothes and white hair. Mrs. Sun's eyes were filled with distress, but there was more helplessness. She whispered, Xiaofu, don't be afraid. Prince Ding and Princess Ding are not bad people. We are guarding the property left by your father. How many people are eyeing it covetously? Only by relying on the Prince Ding mansion will Nyangqin be able to protect the things your father left for you. Therefore, if Xiaofu were to meet Prince Ding and Princess Ding in the future, she mustn't be afraid, okay? They are all good people. They won't hurt Xiaofu. Sun Xiaofu looked at her mother blankly. What her mother said was right, but, was Prince Ding, who had killed so many people, really a good person? Wasn't it true that good people couldn't do bad things? Killing should be considered a bad thing, right? As if understanding her daughter's thoughts, Mrs. Sun sighed in a low voice and said, some people who kill many people are not necessarily bad people. Sometimes, it's because they can't help themselves. Looking into her daughter's blank eyes, Mrs. Sun rubbed her daughter's little head and smiled. You'll understand when Xiaofu grows up. Sun Yunyang greets Prince and Princess. In the study of the post house, Mrs. Sun held Yili's hand and bowed respectfully to Mo Xiuyao and Mo Xiuyao. Mo Xiuyao raised his head and glanced at her. He said indifferently, get up. Mrs. Sun thanked him and lowered her head to whisper to her daughter, Xiaofu, why don't you greet Prince and Princess? Sun Xiaofu, who had been taught well at home, still had some problems. When she saw Mo Xiuyao sitting at the head of the table, she was so scared that she didn't dare to speak. She only hid beside her mother and pulled on Mrs. Sun's corner, not daring to come out. Seeing this, Yili smiled and said to Mrs. Sun, the child is still young. Don't force it. Mrs. Sun smiled helplessly and looked at her daughter with a hint of worry in her eyes. After the wet nurse took Sun Xiaofu out, Mrs. Sun solemnly bowed to Mo Xiuyao and Yili again. She said in a deep voice, the princess was assassinated this time because of my improper arrangements. Prince, please punish me. Although Mo Xiuyao didn't vent his anger on them these days, how could the sharp Mrs. Sun not know that Prince Ding was also dissatisfied with the Sun family because of Princess Ding? However, the Emperor of Xiling had just taken over the city. Prince Ding naturally couldn't abolish all the powerful and wealthy merchants. What's more, the Sun family was the first to join the Prince Ding mansion. Now that the Bai family was gone, Prince Ding wouldn't touch the Sun family at this time. But, even if he didn't touch them now, it didn't mean that he wouldn't touch them in the future. Although she was a woman, since she took on the reputation of the head of the Sun family, then she had to take on the responsibility of the head of the Sun family. As expected, Mo Xiuyao looked at her lightly and didn't speak. However, the faint pressure made a mentally retarded woman like Mrs. Sun lower her head with some difficulty. On the main seat, Yili gently held the back of Mo Xiuyao's hand and smiled faintly. Mo Xiuyao's expression softened and he said lightly, the princess has pleaded for you this time, so the punishment is waived. I and the princess are about to leave the imperial city. In the future, you should assist the fourth young master in governing the West Hill. Do you understand? Madame Sun was overjoyed. She bowed respectfully to Yili and said, Madame Sun thanks the princess for her kindness. Yili smiled faintly and raised her hand, saying, get up. This matter has nothing to do with you. Speaking of which, Mrs. Sun was really wronged. Originally, the Autumn Flower Festival was held to help the Prince Ding Mansion make friends with those who wanted to join the Prince Ding Mansion. How could she have expected the assassination? Moreover, with the power of the Sun family, how could they compete with the trusted and elite subordinates of Genom of Gojosian? It wasn't easy for a young woman like her to support a large family business with a daughter. As long as she didn't do anything she shouldn't do, Yili was willing to give her some convenience and face. Mrs. Sun was even more grateful to Yili. She knew very well that although she could support the Sun family business, she wasn't very outstanding compared to the capable subordinates of Prince Ding. In terms of family business, the Han family and the Feng family in Glass City were probably far above the Sun family. It wasn't easy to gain the attention of Prince Ding. However, if she had the support of the princess, no matter what, ordinary people wouldn't dare to bully her. As such, the way she looked at Yili became more sincere. Mrs. Sun bowed to Yili again and thanked her before getting up. Has the matter of the Bai family been settled? Mo Xiaoyao asked after Mrs. Sun stood up. As a famous family in the West Hill, the Bai family naturally had countless properties under their name. There were also treasures bestowed by the Emperor of Gojosian and the Empress. Not to mention others, even Mrs. Sun, who had been ordered to go and seize the Bai family's properties, was shocked. Mrs. Sun nodded and said, "It has been settled. The properties under the Bai family's name have been sent to the study to be sealed after accounting. They can be checked after the fourth young master recovers. In addition, there are 57,000 taels of silver and 12,000 taels of gold. There are 873,000 taels of silver in the bank, 100,000 taels of gold notes, 678 pieces of various precious antiques, 34 boxes of jewelry, 275 scrolls of precious calligraphy and paintings, and 452 ancient books. The total amount of property confiscated by the Bai family is 5 million taels. It has been recorded. Princess Prince, please take a look. After the fourth young master takes over the imperial city, you can send people to Glass City." As she spoke, Mrs. Sun took out a thin book from her sleeve and handed it over. Chapter 717. Mo Xiaoyao took it and glanced at it. He smiled faintly. It seems that Shi Ling isn't considered poor. Does this count as hiding wealth among the people? He passed the booklet to Yili. Yili flipped through it and was also surprised. However, when she thought about the Prince Ding Mansion's enormous and immeasurable wealth, she felt that it wasn't so hard to accept. This was the true wealth of a century-old clan. Like the Yi family in the past, they were anxious about tens of thousands of taels of silver. They were clearly new or nouveau riche. However, even so, the Bai family's wealth was obviously a little too much. Just thinking about how the Bai family had produced several empresses and more than 10 imperial concubines, their relationship with the imperial family couldn't be said to be not close. Perhaps it wasn't hard to understand such deep wealth. Yili thought for a moment and said, "Send the silver notes, cash and gold to fourth brother. It would be too much of a hassle to send the army's salary and supplies from Li City." Mo Xiaoyao didn't think and nodded. Yili is right. Let Zhuo Jing send it over in a moment. Yili nodded and no longer cared about this matter. She looked at the booklet in her hand and said, "These antiques and the like. I'm afraid it'll be troublesome to bring them back. Just pick a few and bring them back. Also, I saw that there are 2 swords in here, plus the 2 swords that were sent over a while ago. Give one to General Zhang, General Liu, and General Yuan. The other one will be given to Marquis Nan." Mo Xiaoyao leaned back in his chair and played with Yili's hair as he motioned for Zhuo Jing, who was standing beside him, to record down Yili's instructions. "You're only giving Zhang Qilan and the others. Aren't you afraid that Feng San will cause trouble for you?" Yili said with a smile, I remember that among these antiques, there is a golden folding fan with a picture of mountains and rivers drawn by Wu Jikai of the previous dynasty. Presumably, young Master Feng San likes fans more than swords. Feng Zhiyao had always liked to show off his natural and unrestrained elegance. Regardless of whether it was winter or summer, he would carry a fan. With such a fan that could be considered a treasure, how could he still remember to ask for a treasured sword? Mo Xiuyao seemed to recall young Master Feng San's proud appearance when he was dressed in red and holding a folding fan. He couldn't help but smile. It's a waste to give such a good thing to him. But he still waved his hand to indicate for Zhuo Jing to remember. Yili picked out a lot of things from the booklet and gave them to the meritorious officials of the Western expedition. Almost everyone got one. In addition, he also remembered to add a month's worth of rations for the ordinary soldiers. In any case, the Bai clan had seized so many things this time, it was an unexpected windfall. If the Prince Ding mansion received all of Prince Ding's money, it wouldn't be good. During this time, Mo Xiuyao didn't raise any opinions. He just smiled and watched as Yili calmly gave out orders. There was a cold smile on his face that was different from normal people's. He appeared very gentle and calm. Zhuo Jing and Lin Han, who were standing to the side, didn't care. Madame Sun, who was waiting with them, was extremely shocked. Clearly, Prince Ding trusted Princess Ding more than anyone could imagine. There were many things that Princess Ding didn't need to discuss with Prince Ding. She directly gave orders to people to do it. Prince Ding didn't show any displeasure or doubt. It was as if the Prince Ding mansion's interference in the Prince Ding mansion's political and military affairs was half natural. In this regard, Madame Sun's importance and loyalty to Yili silently increased. After Yili finished giving orders, Zhuo Jing turned and went out to do his work. Yili closed the book and said with a smile, "Let's bring those unique books back to Glass City. Grandfather will be very happy when he sees them." I didn't expect the Bai clan to have hidden some good unique books. Although the number was a drop in the ocean compared to the Su family, many of the original books could only be encountered and not sought. Even one extra book was enough to make many scholars unable to contain their joy. Mo Xiuyao smiled and said, "I'm afraid we can't take all of them. In any case, we have to leave some for your fourth brother to use as a bribe." Yili blinked and suddenly understood. Glass City wasn't the only place that had great scholars. Xiling also had a great scholar, and it just so happened that he was the great scholar that they needed help from. If Mr. Long Ting knew that they had swept away so many unique books and didn't leave a single one for him, the old man would probably make things difficult for her fourth brother and wouldn't give up. Yili could only pick out some that her grandfather and two uncles were interested in and take away. The rest were given to Su Qingbai to use as a stepping stone to invite Mr. Shooting out of the mountain. Time passed very quickly. In the blink of an eye, a few days had passed. It was already the day that Mo Xiuyao and Yili prepared to leave for Glass City. The 300,000 soldiers and Zhang Qilan stayed in Xiling. Only Feng Zhiyao, Su Qingfeng, Yun Ting, the 3,000 Black Cloud Cavalry, and the Shadow Guard Qi Lin returned with Mo Xiuyao and Yili. The day before they left, Mo Xiuyao used Prince Ding's name to issue the first edict in Xiling. The edict announced that the Emperor Xiling City was changed to Anping City. At the same time, Su Qingbai was appointed as the governor of the 5 states and 12 cities of Xiling. He was in charge of all military and civil affairs in Xiling. Zhang Qilan was also appointed as the Great General of the West. He was in charge of 300,000 soldiers stationed in Xiling. All the soldiers in Xiling were under Zhang Qilan's control. Once the edict was issued, everyone was shocked. Although there had never been a so-called governor before, one could understand the authority of this official position just by looking at the power that Mo Xiuyao had bestowed upon it. As long as it was within Xiling, it could be said to be Su Qingbai's world. Although Zhang Qilan was in charge of military affairs, it had to be known that Su Qingbai was in charge of the military pay. From this, one could see how much Prince Ding trusted the Su family. Su Qingbai, who felt that he had been cheated by Mo Xiuyao, had no choice but to support his walking body. He personally returned the 1,000,000 taels of silver that Mo Xiuyao had given him. He expressed that since he had sent Feng Huiding, the matter of money should naturally be handled by someone who knew how to manage money. He would not serve. Mo Xiuyao was displeased by Su Qingbai's distrust of him. Su Qingbai sighed helplessly. I didn't offend His Highness Prince Ding, did I? Are you trying to roast me over a fire? Mo Xiuyao could only take it back resentfully. He argued, I was just trusting fourth young Master Su. However, he sighed silently in his heart. Why were the people of the Su family so smart? He just felt that Su Qingchen, that cunning fellow, was unreliable and might slip away at any time. That was why he wanted to train fourth young Master Su. Compared to Su Qingchen, who was almost demonic in intelligence, Su Qingbai, who was smart and down-to-earth, was a better choice to be enslaved. Prince Ding, who was full of resentment, forgot to consider that if Su Qingbai was not smart enough, why would he set a trap for what might be 800 years in the future? Chapter 718. Mo Xiuyao and Yi Li brought their entourage back to Li City. Because they were also pregnant, they traveled slowly and did not feel anxious because the Mahist army guarding the northwest had already started fighting with the Western Ling northern tribes. At this time, thousands of li away, Mo Jingli, who was facing off against Genom of Gojoseon, also received news from Li City. In the palace that had been wantonly renovated on the foundation of the original Li Palace, Missouri Jingli's face darkened as he looked at the booklet that had just been presented to him. Although the current Chu Palace had been expanded on the foundation of the original Li Palace, because Mo Jingli and Mo Jingqi had had a falling out, the reconstruction had already begun. Therefore, after so many years, the results were not small. The Dechu State's court had hurriedly moved to the south of the Yunlon River, but there had not been any chaos. With Mo Jingli as the head, the small court of the Dechu State had been maintained just like this. However, the court that was located in Jiangnan could no longer be considered large. It could barely be called Southern Chu. In the great hall sat the 6 or 7-year-old weak and insensible little emperor. Beside him sat the powerful regent prince, Mo Jingli, on a chair that was almost as resplendent as the dragon throne. Seeing Mo Jingli's ugly expression, the officials below did not dare to speak. Jiangnan was now completely in the Li Palace's territory. Living under someone else's roof always had to be at a disadvantage. Moreover, the courageous civil and military officials would rather die than leave the capital and stay in the crumbling Chu capital. How could the remaining people have the courage to fight against the Li King as an equal? Although the Empress Dowager still had some power, she had gradually become weaker after moving the capital. The Empress Dowager's courage was not much greater than the 6 or 7-year-old emperor's. Everyone faintly knew that before long, the little emperor would abdicate and the Dechu state would have a new emperor. Mo Jingli looked down at the people below and sneered, "Do you want to know what it says?" Everyone couldn't help but be startled, secretly exchanging looks. His words were a little strange. Mo Jingli did not care. He raised his hand and lightly flicked the booklet in his hand. After Mo Xiuyao took over the emperor of Xiling City, he renamed it Onping City. Now, Mo Xiuyao has already left Xiling and returned to the northwest. Hearing this, the officials present had different expressions. They all exchanged looks with their close colleagues to exchange their views. Mo Jingli said impatiently, "If you have something to say, just say it." A moment later, an official stood out and bowed to report, "Prince, now that Prince Ding has returned to the northwest, does this mean the Mahist army may send reinforcements to the Chu capital? If so, Mo Jingli snorted disdainfully and looked at him with a half-smile. So what if so? Do you still hope to return to the Chu capital? Not to mention, Enchanting is blocking the other side. So what if they take back the Chu capital? The northern border of the northern tribes and Xiling are surrounded by enemies. How is the Chu capital different from an isolated city? Also, do you think the Chu capital Mo Xiaoyao saved is the Chu capital of the imperial family or the Chu capital of the Prince Ding mansion? The prince has penetrating insight. I am wrong. The official's expression changed slightly and he returned to the ranks dispiritedly. Mo Jingli looked at the crowd indifferently and said, "You don't have to be too disappointed. Even if Mo Xiaoyao wants to reinforce the Chu capital, I'm afraid it will be too late. Now, there are still hundreds of thousands of northern tribes cavalry and 200,000 Xiling army stationed outside the Feihong Pass." "Prince, then the genom of Gojoseon of Xiling," Mo Jingli said disdainfully, "the Xiling army is not good at water battles. The Yunlan River is no different from their natural stronghold. Order the soldiers along the river to keep it safe for I. One day, I will make Enchanting look bad." Everyone immediately understood. King Li planned to stay in Jiangnan and guard the natural stronghold of the Yunlan River. He wanted to sit on the land of fish and rice in Jiangnan. In a short time, he had no plans to send troops north to restore the mountains and rivers. They couldn't help but feel a wave of disappointment and loss. They didn't want the battle to take place in the Chu capital and follow King Li to move the capital to Jiangnan. They only comforted themselves and said that they would rise again in the future. But now, perhaps this was how it would be for the rest of their lives. Seeing that there was nothing else to discuss, Mo Jingli dismissed the officials. After a while, other than the eunuchs, there was only the little Emperor Mo Suyun left in the hall. Mo Suyun was very afraid of this royal uncle who always stared at him with a very scary gaze. Seeing that there was no one around, he could only shrink his thin body into the dragon throne. Mo Jingli's eyes darkened. The gaze he used to stare at the child on the dragon throne became more and more gloomy. If his son was still alive, he would also be as old as this child. But Mo Jingqi didn't know where his son was, and he still had to take care of Mo Jingqi's son. Looking at the timid child, he became more and more displeased. Mo Jingli pulled Mo Suyun down from the dragon throne and pulled him into the back palace. He didn't care how a 7-year-old child could keep up with the steps of an adult. He was practically dragged along by Mo Jingli along the way. Along the way, the eunuchs naturally saw the little emperor's sorry state. But right now, it could be said that the regent had the final say in the palace. Who dared to advise him? Mo Jingli pulled Mo Suyun all the way to the Empress Dowager's palace. The Empress Dowager Li was talking with the Empress Dowager. Seeing Mo Jingli come in, she was first shocked. When she saw her son's sorry state, her tears immediately fell. "My son, go away," Mo Jingli said impatiently. If it was said that he still had some respect for his former sister-in-law, Empress Dowager Hua, then this Empress Dowager Li was even less than a blade of grass in Mo Jingli's eyes. As expected, Empress Dowager Li was so frightened that she trembled. She froze on the spot and didn't dare to move. She could only helplessly look at her son's pale face with tears. The Empress Dowager, who was sitting on the side, secretly shook her head and sighed. Although she didn't like the Empress Dowager being too strong, this Empress Dowager Li was too weak. It was said that a mother was strong, but this Empress Dowager Li couldn't be strong for her son. "Li, what are you doing?" Looking at the gloomy face of Mo Jingli, the Empress Dowager Li reprimanded unhappily. Mo Jingli casually threw Mo Suyun to the ground. He didn't care whether he was injured or not. He sneered and said, "What do you think I am doing? Mother, tell me, where did Mo Jingqi take my son?" The Empress Dowager Li was silent. If she didn't understand before, she would have understood after such a long time. She would never have thought that her two sons would be so merciless to their own brother from the same mother. She shook her head and said, "I don't know. You also know that my relationship with your brother is not as filial as outsiders think. If he did such a thing, why would he tell me?" In the past few months, Mo Jingli came to ask almost every few days. The Empress Dowager Li also vaguely understood that the child that Yi Ying gave birth to was Mo Jingli's only child in this life. "You should ask Empress Dowager Li about this. Didn't you want to protect her?" The Empress Dowager Li said lightly, but there was a hint of ridicule in her words. Her own son didn't save his own mother when she was about to be buried with her, but went to protect an outsider. Every time she thought of this, the Empress Dowager Li's heart felt stifled. Chapter 719. Noble Consort Lu, that bitch. Mo Jingli cursed angrily. Outsiders thought that Noble Consort Lu had been burned to death in the fire, but those who knew the truth knew what had happened. In order to escape, Noble Consort Lu didn't hesitate to kill her own daughter. She was truly vicious. However, Mo Jingli searched the entire outside of the country, but he still couldn't find any trace of Noble Consort Lu. In a fit of rage, Mo Jingli threw the entire Lu family into prison, but after several months of interrogation, he still didn't get any information. The Empress Dowager sighed and looked at Mo Jingli. "I just heard that after Prince Ding took down the Emperor of Xiling, he has already returned to Li City." Mo Jingli sneered and said, "Imperial Mother's information is indeed well informed, but this doesn't need Imperial Mother's concern. The harem cannot interfere in politics." "You!" The Empress Dowager's face darkened. Her anger was stuck in her chest, and her face couldn't help but turn red and blue. Her finger that was pointing at Mo Jingli kept trembling, but she couldn't say a word. On the side, Madame Li came back to her senses. Fortunately, she was used to serving the Empress Dowager, so she quickly went forward to help the Empress Dowager breathe. After a long while, the Empress Dowager came back to her senses, but she had already left with Mo Jingli. "Imperial Mother." Madame Li held a cup of ginseng tea and called out timidly. The Empress Dowager waved her hand, and the furnishings on the table fell to the ground. She cried with tears running down her face, "What sin did I commit to give birth to these two unfilial sons?" Mo Jingli, who had already stepped out of the palace, heard the crying from inside, and a disdainful sneer appeared on his face. The so-called mother-son relationship had long been wiped clean in these years. In Mo Jingli's heart, his biological mother wasn't even as important as taking care of his aunt, consort Xianzhao. Therefore, after moving south, Mo Jingli didn't hesitate to also make consort Xianzhao the Empress Dowager. This also caused the Empress Dowager to have a grudge against her cousin who had supported her all her life. The relationship between the two was no longer as good as before. Strolling along the winding corridors of the palace, Missouri Jingli temporarily put aside the matter of his son and thought back to what had happened in the Great Hall. Thinking of the rising expectations in the eyes of those ministers and the gradually dimming eyes, he couldn't help but smile even colder. Or did he have expectations for Mo Xiuyao? How foolish. He sat on the rich land of Jiangnan. Why would he fight with those people? He only needed to guard the Yunlan River and manage Jiangnan well, enriching the people and strengthening the soldiers. Let Mo Xiuyao fight it out with the Northern Territory and the Western Hill barbarians. Mo Xiuyao could win against one or two families, but how could he win against three? When both sides were injured, he would take advantage of the situation to reclaim the mountains and rivers. Who dared to say that Mo Jingli wasn't the master of resurgence? At this time, Leng Haoyu, who had retreated to the Chu capital because of the loss of Zijing Pass and planned to take his old father back to the northwest to see his son, had his face fall when he saw the letter that Wei Lin had personally delivered. He looked helplessly at Wei Lin and said, "Little Wei, can't you come 2 days later? I'm already preparing to leave for the northwest." Wei Lin looked at him with a smile and said, "Master Qingchen means that even if you reach the gates of Feihong Pass, you will have to return the way you came." Lang Haoyu snorted softly but knew that he was speaking the truth. He waved the letter in his hand and asked, "Why did Master Qingchen have you personally send me off? Isn't this a waste of talent?" Although Wei Lin was only Princess Ding's personal bodyguard, everyone in the Prince Ding mansion knew that the princess had never used Zhuo Jing, Lin Han, and Wei Lin as bodyguards. Moreover, their abilities were far from what mere bodyguards could compare to. If they were released to do things, their status wouldn't be much lower than Lang Haoyu's. Therefore, even Feng San and Lang Haoyu, who were Mo Xiuyao's old confidants, had always treated Wei Lin and the others as equals. Wei Lin said seriously, "Master Qingchen means for this subordinate to help General Lang defend the Chu capital with second young Master Lang." Sitting at the side, Ling Huai was stunned. Ever since Ling Huai was brought back to the Chu capital by Lang Haoyu and saw the current situation of the Chu capital, Ling Huai was already a little disheartened. But even so, Ling Huai didn't want to give up on the Chu capital and flee in panic like a deserter. But this son, who had never been valued since he was young, showed unprecedented fierceness and methods, not giving Ling Huai any chance to choose. But he didn't expect the situation to take a turn before he left. Although Ling Huai was happy, he was still a little worried. What if Lang Haoyu fell into this and couldn't escape? As a subject and general of the Dechu state, his death was not to be regretted, but he didn't want his son to be buried with him. "Master Wei, will His Highness Prince Ding send reinforcements?" Ling Huai asked. Wei Lin frowned slightly and said, "When this subordinate left the northwest, the prince was still in Xiling and hadn't returned. Outside the Feihong Pass, there were hundreds of thousands of Northern Militant Army and Xiling Army eyeing covetously. However, as early as a few years ago, the princess had arranged an ambush in the territory of the Great Chu, and General Murongxin had also received a letter from young Master Qingchen. He would temporarily give up the confrontation with Lei Jinting and continue to lead his troops north. Master Qingchen hopes that the Chu capital can hold on for at least 3 months. 3 months. Ling Huai frowned slightly. It wasn't that he didn't know the difficulties of the Mahist army at this time, but the Chu capital wasn't having an easy time either. When Mo Jingli went south, he took most of the troops with him. Now, only the remnants of the defeated Northern Militant Army and the northern frontier and some troops left behind to defend the city were left in the Chu capital. The old subordinates of the Nosy Duquois only had about 200,000 people. The morale of the defeated soldiers from the front line was extremely low. Now that the army was at the city gates, the morale of the entire army and the people in the city was also low. Not to mention 3 months, Ling Huai was worried about whether the city could hold on for a month. 3 months is no problem. If the Chu capital can't hold on for 3 months, this old man will die to appease the world on the day the city falls. A somewhat old but still loud voice came from outside the door. Everyone looked back and found that it was Duquois with white hair and beard. Although he was already 70 years old, Duquois still wore armor and a battle robe. He walked in majestically, vaguely showing the boldness and heroism that he had when he was on the battlefield. Everyone hurriedly got up and said, "Old Duke, Great Elder Princess." Beside Duquois was Great Elder Princess Fuxi, who also had snow-white hair, and Great Elder Princess Xiaoyang was supporting Great Elder Princess. Behind them were a boy and a girl about 12 or 13 years old. The girl lowered her head, but it still couldn't hide the scar on half of her face. They were Princess Xining and Prince Mo Xiaoyun, who were born by concubine Liu. Mo Jingli left with many princes, princesses and relatives of the royal family. For some reason, this pair of siblings stayed with great elder Princess Fuxi. Du Kuo looked at Ling Huai and Leng Haoyu for a while before asking, will Prince Ding really send troops to rescue the Chu capital? Leng Haoyu slightly restrained his expression, and a foppish smile appeared on his lips. He said, Old Duke, aren't you making things difficult for me? I've been into Chu state all the time, and I've only been to the northwest a few times. How can I know what Prince means? What's more, Prince is still far away in West Hill, and it's young Master Qingchen's idea to help defend the city. Therefore, no one knew what Prince Ding was planning to do. Although young Master Qingchen was a man of his word in the northwest, he was not Prince Ding after all, so he couldn't make any promises to Du Kuo on behalf of Prince Ding. Chapter 720. Du Kuo snorted and glanced at Ling Huai with a spurious smile. Among your sons, I think this one is more capable. Du Kuo had always paid attention to the Prince Ding mansion, and Leng Haoyu had always been close to Feng Zhiyao, who had been friends with Mo Xiuyao since they were young. Naturally, Du Kuo was no stranger to him. He didn't expect that he was also a wolf in sheep's clothing. In the past, he only thought that the descendant of the Leng family was a businessman. Now, looking at his performance at Xijing Pass, Leng Haoyu, who had always acted like a hedonistic son, was actually hiding his strength. He was even stronger than Leng Qingyu, who had always been praised by others. Ling Huai could only smile awkwardly. He only took it as the old duke teasing him that he couldn't even see through his own son. However, he wasn't unhappy that Leng Haoyu, a bastard son, was more capable than his eldest son, whom he had carefully cultivated. Leng Haoyu was able to surpass his eldest brother even when he wasn't valued at all. This proved that he was capable. They were all his sons, so Ling Huai naturally didn't have any knot in his heart. Du Kuo narrowed his eyes at Leng Haoyu, who looked lazy and loose, and said lightly, Young man Leng, don't beat around the bush with this old man. This old man doesn't believe that you don't know what the Prince Ding mansion means. Leng Haoyu's eyes turned, and he sat up with a smile. Old Duke, you can't say that. Let's not talk about what the Prince Ding mansion means. Even if the prince comes back in advance and is willing to send troops to help. There are more than 1 million northern tribes troops between the northwest and the Chu state. It doesn't seem like they can make it in time. Also, even if this junior is blunt, old duke, even if Chu Jing is saved, who will it belong to? Du Kuo stared at Leng Haoyu and asked, is this Prince Ding's or eldest young Master Su's intention? Leng Haoyu didn't care about the pressure that Du Kuo deliberately released. He rubbed his nose and smiled. I'm just asking casually. Old Duke also knows that Leng Haoyu is a businessman. Logically speaking, Chu Jing's life and death had nothing to do with the Prince Ding mansion. Why should the Prince Ding mansion take the risk of setting the rear on fire to reinforce the Chu capital, and even face the armies of the northern tribes and the northern region? Du Kuo remained silent. Of course, he understood what Leng Haoyu meant. The Maoist army had no obligation to sacrifice the lives of so many officers and soldiers to help the Chu state repel the enemy, to help the Chu state defend Chu capital. Especially now that the entire De Chu state's imperial family had abandoned the Chu capital and hurriedly moved south, what right did the Maoist army have to help their enemy take back the city? Second young Master Leng. Leng Haoyu smiled and said, Thank you, old duke. After sending off Du Kuo and his party, Leng Haoyu touched his chin and silently pondered whether he should write a letter to urge young Master Qingchen to send troops quickly. It was really not easy to hold on for 3 months. If he was not careful, he might lose his life. Ling Huai looked at his son's lowered eyebrows and pondered silently. Compared to the almost foreseeable bitter battle that was about to come, who Chu capital would belong to in the end did not seem so important. Chapter 721. Mo Xiaoyao and Yili traveled slowly, not only because they were concerned about the child in Yili's belly, but also because they wanted to see the people of Xiling under the control of the Mahist army. Originally, it would only take a dozen or so days to travel at top speed. When the group returned to Xiling, it was already November. In November, not only Xiling, but the entire northern region was very cold. The northwesterly city had already had 2 rounds of winter. Su Hongyu had governed well and the officials of the northwest were also doing their best. Even though the outside world was still in chaos, the people of the northwest were still living very peacefully. When the group returned to Li City, they did not notify anyone in advance to receive them. When the people of the Prince Ding mansion received the news, the carriage had already arrived at the entrance of the Prince Ding mansion. Dismissing the guards who were startled by the sudden return of the prince, Mo Xiaoyao helped Yili into the mansion. The other matters were naturally left to Feng Zhiyao, Qing Feng, Zhua Jing, and the others to handle. Mother. From far away, Mo Xiaobao's voice passed through the somewhat desolate garden and came from the inner courtyard. Yili had just stood still when she saw Mo Xiaobao wearing a black brocade robe embroidered with silver dragon patterns, quickly rushing over. It had only been a few months, but Mo Xiaobao seemed to have grown a lot taller. Mo Xiaobao was about to rush in front of Yili and give his dear mother a warm hug. Mo Xiaoyao at the side easily raised his hand and hooked onto his collar. Unable to move forward, Mo Xiaobao unwillingly twisted his body, but he could not break free from his father's hand. He could only pout his small mouth and look at Yili. Mother. Yili smiled. Mo Xiaoyao brought Mo Xiaobao in front of him and looked down at him. Your mother is pregnant. Mo Xiaobao was stunned for a moment. He blinked his round black eyes, and it took him a while to realize what pregnant meant. For a moment, he looked at Yili's somewhat conspicuous abdomen and stuttered, Mother. Xiaobao. Xiaobao is going to have a younger brother or sister? Yili nodded, stroked her son's little head and asked, Yes, does Xiaobao like a younger brother or a younger sister? Xiaobao furrowed his brows in confusion. After a while, he nodded seriously and said, I like both. Of course, he liked the younger sister more, but if it was a younger brother, it would be good too. Then, he could teach him well. His younger brother must be much smarter than Dummy Lang. At that time, they would be able to deal with Imperial Father and snatch Mother back. Didn't Big Uncle say that if the brothers were of one heart, their sharpness could cut through metal? It would be even better if his little brother didn't fight with him for his mother. Of course, as an elder brother, he was still very magnanimous. He would share a little of his mother with his younger brother. Yili looked at Mo Xiaobao with amusement. His expression was constantly changing, sometimes nodding and sometimes laughing in a strange manner. She didn't know what he was thinking, but he just stood there in a daze. Mo Xiaoyao looked at his son's unconcealed smirk, and his lips hooked up into a faint sneer. He didn't need to guess to know what this kid was thinking. Raising his hand, he gently flicked Mo Xiaobao's forehead. Mo Xiaobao cried out and held his forehead with tears in his eyes, staring at Mo Xiaoyao accusingly. Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows and looked at him indifferently. So what if I flicked you? Woo-woo. Mother, Imperial Father bullied Xiaobao. Being bullied by others, Mo Xiaobao was very sad. All right, Mother, does it hurt? Looking at her son's pitiful appearance, Yili helplessly glared at Mo Xiaoyao. Leaning over, she rubbed the invisible pain on Mo Xiaobao's forehead and said, Xiaobao, be good, don't cry. In fact, Mo Xiaoyao didn't use much strength, and Mo Xiaobao didn't feel much pain. What hurt more was his self-esteem. That kind of frustration of being obviously weaker than the opponent and being bullied without any power to fight back, once again deeply hit Mo Xiaobao's self-esteem. Big brother Yu Qin. Ling Xiaodai with short legs finally caught up with them. Seeing Yili and Mo Xiaoyao, who he hadn't seen for a long time, he froze for a moment. He shyly smiled at Yili and Wang Fei. The little child ran behind Mo Xiaobao and grabbed the corner of Mo Xiaobao's clothes, not letting go. Children's senses were always very sharp. In Glass City, whether it was Ling Junhan, who wasn't even 4 years old, or Su Jiroe, who was almost 5 years old, they were all very afraid of Mo Xiaoyao. Mo Xiaobao saw that in front of his little brother, he couldn't pretend to be pitiful and ruin his image. He could only put away his crying expression and resentfully glared at Mo Xiaoyao. Yili helplessly held Mo Xiaobao's hand and Ling Junhan's hand and walked towards the hall. Just as they arrived outside the hall, Su Hongyu, Su Hongyan, Su Qingze and the others who had rushed over after receiving the news had already rushed out of the study. The two uncles looked at Yili, seeing that she didn't lose weight and her complexion was very good. They let out a sigh of relief and relaxed their expressions. Yili said with a faint smile, "First uncle, second uncle, Li is back." Su Hongyu nodded and said in a deep voice, "It's good that you're back." After entering the hall and taking a seat, Su Hongyu asked, "Did anything happen on the way?" Li is now. Although the news of Yili's pregnancy was hidden from the outside world, the Su family had already received the news in advance. Ever since Yili gave birth to Mo Xiaobao, there had been no movement from Yili. Although Xinyang and Dr. Lin said that everything was normal and let nature take its course, and Yili and Mo Xiaoyao didn't have any obsession with children, in the eyes of outsiders, the Prince Ding mansion only had one child was a little weak. Now Yili was pregnant again. Although there was something wrong after the incident, it was still good news. Yili nodded and said, "Li is all right. I've made Uncle worry." Then she talked about some things in West Hill and Su Qingbai's injury so that everyone could rest assured. Su Hongyu saw that Yili's face was a little tired. When he was about to ask her to go back and rest first and talk about the old days another day, he heard someone outside saluting, "Greetings, old master." It turned out that Mr. Qingyun knew that Yili and Mo Xiaoyao were back and also hurried over. Everyone hurriedly stood up to welcome him. Su Qingze went forward to help Mr. Qingyun in. Yili went forward and bowed, "Grandfather, Li is back." Mr. Qingyun reached out to support her and smiled lovingly, "You're already pregnant, how can you be so careless? Those rules and etiquette should be avoided if possible. Is our family still paying attention to those empty formalities?" Knowing that it was grandfather's love, Yili also stood up and smiled, "Grandfather is too careful. Li is not so delicate." Mr. Qingyun looked at her complexion and nodded, "Well, it seems that you're not bad, but you should take good care of yourself. Last time you had Yuchen, it was very thrilling. This time, it's good that you're safe." Yili and Su Qingze each helped Mr. Qingyun to sit down at the head of the table. Mr. Qingyun was not only highly respected, but also very senior. Generally, it was not a very formal occasion. For example, in private in the mansion, Mo Xiaoyao also sat at the head of the table as the grandson-in-law. Li was just thinking about greeting grandfather later. Why did grandfather come in person? Sitting down, Yili asked with a smile. Chapter 722. Master Qingyun waved his hand and said, "I'm healthy now, so it's not a problem for me to walk around a bit more. I'm relieved that I came to see you. After sitting for a while, you can go back and rest. Let's talk about the welcoming banquet in a few days. In any case, outsiders still don't know that you're back." This arrangement was naturally because Master Qingyun felt sorry for his granddaughter. Once Prince Ding and Princess Consort returned to the city, there were countless things to do. Now that Yi Li was almost 5 months pregnant, it really wasn't appropriate for her to be so tired. Su Hongyu frowned and said, "I'm afraid that the welcoming banquet will have to be put on hold for now. Prince needs to hurry to the Dechu state as soon as possible." Mo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows and asked, "Isn't Brother Su overseeing the front? I heard that it went smoothly. What happened?" Su Hongyu took out a letter from his sleeve and said, "This was sent by Lang Haoyu on a fast horse. Prince, take a look. Qingshan isn't good at war, so he can't help much even if he oversees the front. Although Marquis Nan's bravery hasn't diminished in the past, the Northern Militant Army and the Shilling Army are already showing signs of withdrawing. However, it's enough to defend Fu Feihong Pass, but it's impossible to lead troops to the Chu capital within a month. Moreover, it's still unknown whether the Chu capital's garrison can hold on for a month and a half." Mo Xiaoyao looked at Lang Haoyu's letter with interest and said with a smile, "Lang Haoyu really is worthy of learning how to do business for so many years." Originally, he had planned to lead troops east after returning to the northwest and rescue the Chu capital. Of course, he would also take it for himself. Now that he had Lang Haoyu's letter, it was even more justified. But now that Li was pregnant. Looking at Yi Li sitting next to him, Mo Xiaoyao frowned slightly. Yi Li took the letter from Mo Xiaoyao's hand and looked at it. She smiled faintly and said, "Well said, Lang Haoyu has seized the opportunity to do good business this time." If Chu Jing was saved, even Mo Jingli would have nothing to say in the future. In that case, after resting for 2 days, Prince will go to Feihong Pass to replace Big Brother. Mo Xiaoyao frowned and said softly, "But Yi Li." Yi Li smiled and said, "If I bring him along in Glass City, would it be more dangerous than going to the battlefield? It will only be 4 or 5 months." Mo Xiaoyao was unhappy. He pulled the letter back and put it on the table. "Fine, I's a bit tired. I'll rest for a few days first. In any case, Chu capital isn't in a hurry for a day or 2. Everyone present looked at him in unison. What did he mean by Chu capital isn't in a hurry for a day or 2? Chu Jing was clearly on the brink of death. Even a quarter of an hour would be good. Yi Li understood Mo Xiaoyao's thoughts. She didn't face it and just smiled faintly. After chatting for a while, Master Qingyun and the others urged Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao to go back and rest. Even Mo Xiaobao and Ling Junhan were brought to the study by Master Qingyun to be taught. Yi Li and Mo Xiaoyao didn't stand on ceremony. They bid farewell to everyone and went back to their own courtyard. There were already servants in the courtyard who had prepared tea and refreshments with warm water waiting for them. All these years, the people by Yi Li's side had always been the same. Only a few of Yi Li's personal maidservants were already married and had their own homes. Only Qing Shuang wasn't married and had always been by Yi Li's side. The other 2 nannies had always been by Yi Li's side. It was just that Yi Li wasn't in Li City most of the time and had gone to take care of Mo Xiaobao. Once they entered, Qing Shuang brought along the maidservants who were far away to welcome them. Qing Shuang, who was already in her early 20s, was no longer the slightly mischievous and naive maidservant from before. Seeing Yi Li, she couldn't help but smile. Qing Shuang greets Princess. Congratulations to Princess for having a little heir. Yi Li smiled faintly at Qing Shuang. Towards this little maidservant that she had bought from outside and had followed her since she was young, she was always closer to her than to other people. She smiled faintly. "I wasn't here this year. It's been hard on you." Qing Shuang smiled and said, "This is what this servant should do. It's not hard at all. To be able to follow Princess is this servant's good fortune. This servant has already prepared warm water. Princess, 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 please have some hot porridge after you wash up. It might be very cold today. Qing Shuang's words were sincere and sincere. She had gone from an orphan living on the streets to one of the most trusted maidservants of the future princess. Qing Shuang felt that there was nothing luckier than her. Also, she was different from Qing Yu and Qing Wan. They still had their parents and family. She was an orphan who had forgotten who her parents were. Princess had always treated her very well. Even though she was Princess Ding's maidservant, she was still more respectable than the daughters of some of the rich families in Li City. Qing Shuang felt that even if she didn't get married, it was worth it to serve Princess. So in these few years, after Qing Yu, Qing Wan and even Qing Xia got married one after another, Qing Shuang had rejected several matchmakers to wholeheartedly serve Yili. She was the first person to follow Yili. Now, she was the person who had followed Yili the longest. Yili and Mo Xiuyao came out after washing up and changing their clothes. As expected, Qing Shuang had already prepared the hot porridge that the two liked and could nourish their bodies. In these few years, Qing Shuang had gradually grown older and her actions had gradually become steady and considerate. She wasn't as impulsive as before. Dismissing everyone, Yili started to think as she ate. Mo Xiuyao looked at her and raised an eyebrow as he asked, "What is Miss Li thinking about?" Yili said with a smile, "Nothing, I just suddenly thought that in the blink of an eye, Qing Shuang has already passed 20 years old. In these years, she had delayed Qing Shuang's marriage." Mo Xiuyao said, "If Miss Li wants to arrange a marriage with her, let's talk about it later." Usually, once a maidservant got married, they couldn't stay by the side to serve. It wasn't that Mo Xiuyao was reluctant to part with Qing Shuang, but in these few years, Qing Shuang had served Miss Li very well. She was convenient and reliable for Miss Li. Now that Miss Li was pregnant, it was time for her to be careful. It wouldn't be too late to talk about it after the child was born. Yili nodded and said, "I have to ask Qing Shuang's opinion." Back then, Qing Yu and Qing Wan were still betrothed to eldest uncle's family. It could be said that they were reunited with their family. Originally, it was for me that they came from Yunzhou to Chujing. Qing Xia is living quite well now. Only Qing Shuang is suitable. She grew up with me, so it's inevitable that I have to put in more effort. Mo Xiuyao thought for a moment and said, "In that case, after the marriage, let her stay by your side. What do you think of Jin?" Jin. Yili was startled. Speaking of which, although Jin had followed Mo Xiuyao since he was young, Yili really didn't get along with him much. Not long after she married Mo Xiuyao, Jin was let out by Mo Xiuyao to do things. He was often outside and rarely came back. Moreover, Jin was different from Feng Xiao and Leng Haoyu, who were eloquent. He was a silent teenager who would make people think that he was mute if they weren't careful. Therefore, Yili wasn't familiar with him. Mo Xiuyao nodded and said, "Jin is Uncle Mo's nephew. It's just that with his temperament, he definitely can't take over Uncle Mo's position. Uncle Mo's family and Jin's parents all died because of the Prince Ding mansion. These years, I let him go out to gain experience in the hope that he can take charge of things alone so that Uncle Mo can rest assured. Although he can't be like Feng San and Lang Er, he can't be considered to have wronged that girl." Chapter 723. Yili naturally knew. Even though they were not familiar, Yili knew what kind of person Mo Xiuyao was. Also, Jin had grown up with Mo Xiuyao since they were young. Also, with Mo Xiuyao's personality, it was rare for him to say so much about Qing Shuang. He frowned slightly and said, "I will ask Qing Shuang later. But Jin is not with Wang Fei all year round. Even if Qing Shuang is interested, when the child is born, Chu Jing should be taken." At that time, Li will go to Chujing to pick me up and bring a Jean back. I will tell Uncle Mo in advance. Mo Xiaoyao looked intently at Yi Li and said in a low voice. Speaking of this, Yi Li's hand that was eating also paused. In a few days, Mo Xiaoyao would set off for Feihong Pass again. Yi Li helplessly stroked her abdomen and said with a bitter smile, the baby really came at the wrong time. In the past 5 or 6 years of peace, she did not see the baby come. Now, she was pregnant after a year. Mo Xiaoyao was also somewhat dissatisfied. He raised his head and put his hand on her slightly protruding abdomen, saying in a low voice, like Mo Xiaobao, you like to cause trouble? Yi Li could not help but smile. Wasn't that right? Like Mo Xiaobao, they both came out to cause trouble when things were lively. I am about to leave. Will Li miss me at all? Mo Xiaoyao said with some resentment. It was a pity that Li was pregnant. Otherwise, he would definitely take Li with him to Feihong Pass. Even though he wanted to stay and accompany Li more. Yi Li looked at him with a smile and asked, will I not leave just because I miss Prince? The lives of hundreds of thousands of Mahist army, the lives of millions of Chujing citizens and soldiers, and Mo Xiaoyao's many years of painstaking planning and management. So many things couldn't be changed just by saying that she was reluctant to part with him. Besides, Yi Li looked at Mo Xiaoyao with a faint smile and said, Prince, don't you think we've been together for too long? Ever since she returned to the northwest with Mo Xiaobao, the longest time they had been apart was when she left the camp to scheme against Zhu Ling in Bian City. Could it be that Ms. Li is starting to dislike her husband? Mo Xiaoyao said with a shocked expression. Yi Li smiled and said, I don't dislike you, but people say, distance makes the heart grow fonder. They also say that absence makes the heart grow fonder. It's not a bad thing to be apart once in a while. Mo Xiaoyao looked at her and said, people also say that one day apart feels like 3 autumns. I'm already missing Mr. Li even though we haven't separated yet. Yi Li smiled and said, then come back quickly, or I'll come find you after I give birth. Mo Xiaoyao thought for a moment and said seriously, I will definitely come back quickly, before Ms. Li gives birth. All right, I'll wait for you. Yi Li said with a faint smile. Mo Xiaoyao reached out and pulled her into his embrace, saying in a low voice, Ms. Li, I'm sorry. Yi Li was slightly startled and then said with a soft laugh, what's wrong now? Mo Xiaoyao sighed and said, you're pregnant, I can't stay by your side. Yi Li rolled her eyes and said with a smile, what is this? Isn't this serious business? It's not like you're running around with nothing to do. Rising from Mo Xiaoyao's embrace, Yi Li looked at him and said with a serious expression, I'm pregnant, I naturally hope that you can stay by my side until the child is born. But as a person in a position, you have to plan. If you abandon hundreds of thousands of soldiers for me, abandon the soldiers and people in Chujing waiting for you, is that still the Mo Xiaoyao I love? Hearing her words, Mo Xiaoyao's eyes lit up. Ms. Li, Yi Li looked helplessly at a certain person's joyful and unsatisfied expression. She was not someone who liked to talk about love, but it shouldn't make him reveal such a joyful expression, right? Yi Li couldn't help but secretly reflect on herself. Could it be that she had really neglected him? Come back soon, Xiaobao, and I will miss you, Yi Li said softly. Mo Xiaoyao was satisfied. He added another bowl of porridge for himself and ate with relish. After returning, Mo Xiaoyao rested for 3 days before preparing to leave for Feihong Pass. Even this time, other than the people in the Prince Ding mansion, most people in Li City did not know that Prince Ding and Wang Fei had returned. Of course, very few people knew that she was pregnant. Outside Li City, Mo Xiaoyao only took Feng Zhiyao and Yunting with him. The 3 traveled lightly towards Feihong Pass. Even though Mo Xiaoyao did not allow it, Yi Li still came with Su Qingze to send them off. Seeing Yili come out of the carriage in a thick cloak, Mo Xiaoyao couldn't help but frown. He went forward to tighten the cloak around her and said softly, "I said there is no need to send us out of the city. The weather is so cold. Go back quickly." Yili nodded and said with a faint smile, "I know. I will go back after you leave. Be careful on the battlefield." Of course, she knew that Mo Xiaoyao was happy that she had come to send him off. He was just worried that she would catch a cold. Her body was not weak. Even though she had been pregnant for 2 months, she had not suffered much. Mo Xiaoyao nodded and looked reluctantly at Yili. He turned and said to Su Qingze, "Li City and Yili, I will trouble you." Su Qingze's expression was indifferent as usual. He nodded in acknowledgement. Su Qingze was a man of few words, but he had always been steady. He would complete what he had promised. Mo Xiaoyao felt more assured. Even though he knew that Yili was under the protection of the Su family and the Prince Ding mansion. It was much safer than going to the battlefield with him, but he would feel uneasy if he did not see her in front of him. After taking one last look at Yili, Mo Xiaoyao no longer dilly-dallied. He nimbly mounted his horse and rode off into the distance. Watching their figures disappear from sight, Qing Shuang said softly, "Wang Fei, it is very cold outside. Let's go back quickly so that the prince does not worry." Yili nodded and sighed softly, saying, "Let's go back." Chapter 724. After Mo Xiaoyao left, Yili's days were very peaceful. Because she was pregnant, the people of the Prince Ding mansion did not disturb her with political matters. Everyone in the mansion took care of her meticulously, afraid that she would be cold, hungry, and tired. A few days later, when the news that Mo Xiaoyao had appeared at Feihong Pass spread, many people found it strange that they did not see Wang Fei by Prince Ding's side. Only then did the people in Glass City know that the princess consort was already 5 months pregnant. Naturally, there was another celebration. There was still a month until the new year. While the outside world was still in the flames of war, the people in the northwest were at ease and more lively than the new year. Yili had nothing to do every day and took the children to play with Master Qingyun. Now that Mo Xiaoyao was not in the Fu and Yili was pregnant, Second Fu and Su took Qingjing to live in the guest courtyard of the Prince Ding mansion. First, Su Hongyu, Su Hongyan, and Su Qingze were so busy that they did not have time to go home. Second, they could accompany Yili to relieve her boredom. This day, Yili accompanied Master Qingyun to play chess. The 3 little buns were watched by Second Fu and Su and Qingjing as they played on the thick carpeted floor. During the chess game, Master Qingyun and Yili talked about what had happened in Xiling. After Master Qingyun heard Yili talk about Mo Xiaoyao in the city of the Emperor of Xiling, he sighed and said, "Prince Ding is a man of great talent and strategy, born intelligent. If everything goes well, he will be a loyal general whose name will go down in history." When this old man saw him in his youth, I felt that this boy's aura was threatening. He was even more powerful than Prince Ding Shizi at the time. This kind of person can calm the world. Move, but can also make the world complicated. It can be said that his movements are like thunder, and his emotions can control the world. Unfortunately, the emperor was young and rash, and could not tolerate the Prince Ding mansion, and thus made a big mistake. But he didn't know that Prince Ding was such a person. If he couldn't kill him in one go, he would be digging his own grave. Yili put down a chess piece, looked at Mr. Qingyun and asked, "Grandpa, did you expect this to happen?" Mr. Qingyun shook his head and said, "Prince Ding's injuries were too severe. Even I couldn't predict that he would recover. However, even if Prince Ding couldn't recover, he probably couldn't avoid a life and death struggle with the emperor in the end. It's just that, 6 years ago, when this old man first came to the northwest and met Prince Ding, I discovered that he was very different from when he was young. Yi smiled faintly and said, "Many people have said that his temperament now is indeed very different from when he was young." Mr. Qingyun shook his head and said, "It's not just his temperament, but the murderous intent between his eyebrows. Although the Prince Ding mansion has produced many famous generals, they are not truly bloodthirsty people. But when this old man saw Prince Ding again, there was a murderous intent between his eyebrows. Occasionally, there would be a flash of blood in his eyes. It was clearly a sign of a strong murderous intent. After you went to the West Hill, this old man also divined Prince Ding's fortune in my spare time. The divination also showed a murderous intent. This result is not surprising." Yi said somewhat shamefully, "It's all because Li was careless." Mr. Qingyun waved his hand and said, "Grandpa is not such a pedantic person. The so-called divination is just another reference. Moreover, a person like Prince Ding, once he has made up his mind, how can he be trapped by a mere divination? Our generations of the Su family have cultivated their nature. In the early years, the Su family's hands were stained with a lot of blood. It's just that killing too much will damage one's nature. Grandpa is only worried that Prince Ding will fall into a demonic trap and lose his lifespan in vain." Yi nodded, "Thank you for your concern, Grandpa. Li will properly persuade Xiuyao." Mr. Qingyun put down the chess piece and looked at Yi with a smile. Although Li also has a murderous intent, her nature is upright and gentle. She is just right for Prince Ding. In this world, only you can persuade him. Li has much better foresight than your mother." Speaking of his daughter who died early, Mr. Qingyun was somewhat sad. His only daughter was good at everything, but her foresight was somewhat lacking. Her temperament was also not as strong as his granddaughter's. That year, if he had known that this would happen, he would not have cared about his daughter's feelings and betrothed her to someone else. Perhaps she would still be alive now. However, if that was the case, he was afraid that there would not be this granddaughter who could make people sigh in admiration and be proud of her. Seeing that Mr. Qingyun was not in the mood to play chess, Yi also put down the chess piece and said with a smile, "Grandpa, why are you talking about this? Do you miss Mother?" Mr. Qingyun looked at her and hesitated for a moment before saying, "Originally, your eldest uncle wanted to personally tell you this matter. However, he is very busy right now. This old man has nothing to do, so I'll tell you about it. Your father came to Glass City." "Father?" Yi had a moment of realization. The first thing she thought of was indeed her predecessor's father. Although his appearance was harsh, his heart was very loving and filial to his wife and daughter. For a moment, many figures that she thought she had long forgotten appeared in her mind. Even after so many years, many vivid figures did not seem to have lost their original colors. Seeing that her complexion was not good, Mr. Qingyun's eyes flashed with a trace of worry. "Li Yi returned to her senses and shook her head with a faint smile. "Li is fine. I've made Grandpa worry." "Father? Why did Father and the others come to Glass City?" No wonder Yi couldn't remember Yi Wenhua for a moment. When Madame Su was still alive, Yi was often raised in the Su family. She didn't have deep feelings for this father who always made her mother sad. After she regained the memories of her previous life, she began to compare her father and Yi Wenhua's actions in both her previous and current lives. The little bit of admiration she had for her father gradually faded away. After Yi Wenhua brought old Madame Yi and the others back to their hometown, Yi gradually got used to only remembering her father in her previous life. Gradually, she threw this father to the back of her mind. Mr. Qingyun smiled faintly. The Yi family is located in a remote place in the southwest. The Shilling army came from there first. Let's not talk about your father's character. However, he is more knowledgeable than ordinary people. She left early with her family, old and young. Now, it has been more than a month since they arrived in the northwest. Your eldest brother's intention is to settle them down. There's no need to inform you. However, he is still your father. Moreover, even if we settle him down, he may not be willing to stay in the city obediently. If he says anything outside, it will also affect your and Prince Ding's reputation. It's fine that he didn't know you were coming back a few days ago. These days, when he heard that you were coming back, he has already come to see you twice. Previously, Qingzi said that you were tired and stopped him. If you don't see them, I'm afraid they will make a fuss. Yili frowned slightly and thought for a moment before smiling faintly. It's not a big matter. Li understands. I'll go see them later. Qin Zheng, who was playing with a few little buns, raised her head and said, Li, that Minister Yi. Master Yi is fine. But that old Madam Yi, and that Yi Rong, you must not be polite to them. Yili raised her eyebrows and smiled. What? Qin has seen them. Qin Zheng nodded and said, isn't that so? That Yi Rong is already in his teens this year. He is spoiled by Madam Yi and Madam Yi. He just stayed in Li City for less than a month and dared to fight with old General Yuan's grandson. If that's the case, it's fine. However, when he couldn't win, he still shouted that his sister is the princess. Old General Yuan's family is also very sensible. That's why they didn't spread this matter. Even the lowly people who were present at the time were warned. I'm afraid that someone will come over and tell our family. And that old Madam Yi, she is already so old and yet she still goes around making friends with those madams in the city. She uses your identity to show off to them. Qin Zheng had been following second Madame Su for the past few years. Her temper was also much better than when she was in the boudoir. When she spoke of the Yi family, she was not polite. It was obvious that she did not have a good impression of the Yi family. Chapter 725. I know. Yili nodded with a smile. If they stay in Li City obediently, no one can bully them. If there are people in the clan who are motivated and capable, they will have a bright future. If they still want to cause trouble, I am not a living bodhisattva in a temple. Father and grandmother are related to me by blood, but other people are not related. Qin Zheng was relieved and said, it's good that you know. Speaking of which, the Yi family was once prominent, how can they not know anything? What good will it do them to ruin your reputation? Second Madame Su frowned and said, it's just those short-sighted people who like to bully others. But in this Li City, there are not many people who can buy their words. Li City was not big, those who really had influence were the confidants of the Prince Ding mansion, so they naturally understood the attitude of the princess towards the Yi family. At most, they would scare those outsiders who did not know the details. Princess, Yi. Master Yi has brought his family to seek an audience. Outside the door, Chief Steward Mo reported. Because Yi Wenhua was white now, Chief Steward Mo did not know how to address him. Qin Zheng smiled and said, speaking of the devil, he is here. Yili stood up and smiled, I will go and see them. Sir Qingyun said, it's not convenient for you now, why do you still want to go to the front hall? Just let them come over, let this old man see your father. Grandfather, why do you have to waste your energy? That year, the old man betrothed his only beloved daughter to Yi Wenhua, who was from a poor family, but it ended up like this. No one would believe that he was not sad. Who would be willing to let the old man see that son-in-law again and hurt his health for no reason? Sir Qingyun shook his head and said, it's okay, this old man also wants to see what else he has to say. Yili was helpless and could only ask Chief Steward Mo to invite them over. Qin Zheng did not want to see these annoying people and led Ling Junhan and Su Jirue into the inner room. Not long after, Chief Steward Mo brought people over. Yi Wenhua was not alone. There were also Madame Yi, 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 and a few others. Grandfather, father. Yili looked at the people in front of her calmly. Yili hadn't seen Yi Wenhua for 6 or 7 years. Yi Wenhua looked much older than he did 6 or 7 years ago. His handsome and elegant face had many wrinkles. His hair had turned white, and his eyes were gloomy. Seeing the complicated expression on Yili's face, the corners of her mouth moved, but she didn't say anything in the end. Compared to Yi Wenhua, old Madame Yi and Madame Yi were much better. Old Madame Yi was almost 70 years old, but she still looked the same as a few years ago. She was dressed elegantly as if she was still the old madam who lived a comfortable life in the minister's mansion. Yi Wangshe was a little older and fatter than before, but she was also dressed in rich clothes. It was just that there was more shrewdness and harshness in her eyes, which was a little different from the virtuous madam who always pretended to be. Beside Yi Wangshe stood a young man of 18 or 19 years old. He had the same handsome features as Yi Wenhua, but he was much fatter. His eyes were dull, and he didn't have the quiet and dignified look of a scholar. Just like the ignorant rich young masters that Yi Li saw in some useless TV series in her previous life, Yi Li was really curious how Madame Yi raised Yi Rong, who was a little domineering but at least had some good looks, into such a fat and stupid person. The young woman standing behind them looked a little like Yi Lin, but Yi Li didn't know the man. Son-in-law greets father-in-law. Seeing Mr. Qingyun sitting at the head of the table, Yi Wenhua's face changed slightly. He quickly came forward and bowed deeply. Mr. Qingyun put down the blue and white porcelain cup in his hand leisurely, raised his eyes and smiled faintly. Isn't this Minister Yi? I heard that Minister Yi married a virtuous wife when I was in Yunzhou and became the father-in-law of the late emperor. I don't dare to be called father-in-law. Mr. Qingyun was a person of virtue and prestige, so his manners were naturally outstanding. It was the first time that Yi Li heard him say such words. It was obvious that he was dissatisfied with Yi Wenhua for a long time. It was fine if she didn't see him before, but now that she saw him, she didn't have to endure it. No wonder first uncle said that if her grandfather knew about the behavior of the Yi family, he would rush to the capital and beat Yi Wenhua up. She didn't believe it at that time. She always felt that her grandfather, who was a great scholar, wouldn't do that. However, looking at her grandfather's expression, Yi Li knew that no matter how well-mannered he was, he still had a temper. Yi Wenhua's face turned red. He looked a little embarrassed, but he couldn't say anything. At that time, it was true that he married a concubine within half a year after his marriage. Even his first and second daughters weren't born by his legal wife. Later, he even favored Wang and neglected his first wife, which caused Su to die of depression. After so many years, he already understood Wang's temperament and behavior. Which part of her could be called a virtuous wife? The more Yi Wenhua thought about it, the redder his face became. He didn't know what to do. In-law, we are a family after all. Why do you have to be like this? I already know that I was wrong. Seeing that her son was embarrassed, Madame Yi quickly squeezed out a smile and said to Mr. Qingyun. Mr. Qingyun raised his eyebrows. In-law. The Wang family is the Yi family's in-law. Our Su family can't afford it. Did this old woman think that he didn't know that she was the one who caused trouble when Yi Wenhua neglected his daughter? Madame Ye's smile froze. She smiled and said, how can it be? Li Er's mother will always be the eldest daughter-in-law of the Yi family. Li, come here and let me see you. I haven't seen you for so many years. I miss you so much. Madame Yi wiped her tears and looked at Yi Li lovingly. Unfortunately, Yi Li couldn't do as she wished. She smiled faintly and said, Grandmother, thank you for your concern. I am pregnant, so I won't stand up to salute you. Grandmother and father, please sit down. Madame Yi had to walk to the side and sit down embarrassedly. Yi Wenhua looked at Mr. Qing Yun, who looked indifferent. He didn't dare to sit down. He had to stand beside Madame Yi. The others more or less knew that Mr. Qing Yun had a special identity. Even if Wang was unwilling, she still stood obediently. Yi Rong, on the other hand, didn't know what to do. A few years ago, she was still studying and had learned a little. These few years, she had been following Minister Yi in the countryside. She had already returned the basic books that she had learned in her early years to her teacher. With the protection of Madame Yi and Wang Shiyi, Yi Wenhua couldn't control him. That was why he was so lawless. He dared to fight with the grandson of the oldest general in the Mahist army in less than a month after he came to Li City. Of course, he wouldn't just stand there obediently. Yi Rong glanced at the empty chairs at the side and rolled her eyes. She walked towards one of them and sat down. She didn't forget to say, "Father, mother, sixth sister, why are you all standing? Quickly, sit down." Yi Wenhua was so angry that his face turned blue. Mr. Qing Yun said faintly, "Yi family's education is not bad." Yi Rong only thought that Mr. Qing Yun was praising him. He smiled proudly and said, "Of course. Mother, you see." Chapter 726. Bastard. Get up right now. Yi Wenhua was so angry that he was trembling. He had never been so embarrassed in his life. Even when Su Hongyan told him that he didn't teach his daughter well, he didn't feel so embarrassed. Yi Rong was taken aback. She immediately said, "Why can't I sit? Isn't this third sister's house? We have been waiting here for so long. I can't get up." You. Yi Wenhua pointed at Yi Rong and trembled. It seemed that he was going to fall down at any time. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "Well, since you're tired, sit down. Father, Mrs. Wang, sixth sister, and this young man, sit down too." Yi Wenhua looked at Mr. Qing Yun. Mr. Qing Yun snorted and said, "Sit down." Then he carefully sat down beside Madame Yi. Mrs. Wang looked at her son and walked to Yi Rong and sat down beside him. Yi Lin carefully pulled the young man and sat down at the end of the table. Madame Su, who was drinking tea, frowned slightly and didn't say anything. Although the Su family was not strict with etiquette, the rules had been engraved in their bones. In Madame Su's eyes, the Yi family's way of sitting was extremely rude. "Mother, who are they? Why don't they salute you in Taigong?" Mo Xiaobao, who was lying beside Yi Li's legs, blinked his big black eyes and asked in a clear voice. Yi Li gently stroked her son's head and smiled, "This is your great-grandmother, and this is your grandfather. Chen, go and greet them." Mo Xiaobao looked at Yi Wenhua and Madame Yi. Finally, he stood up and walked to them and said, "Great-grandmother, grandfather." At first, Madame Yi stretched out her hand with a kind smile. She thought that Mo Xiaobao was going to kneel down and greet him and wanted to help him up to show her kindness. However, Mo Xiaobao just stood in front of them and greeted them indifferently. His action of stretching out his hand and bending down was a little funny and awkward. Yi Wenhua didn't care. He stared at the handsome boy who was 6 or 7 years old in front of him. He looked a little like his wife. He couldn't help but want to reach out and touch his little head. Good boy, are you Yuqin?" Mo Xiaobao took half a step back and curiously looked at his grandfather who was staring at him. He said seriously, "Grandfather, you can't touch my head." Yi Wenhua was stunned and couldn't help but ask, "Why?" Mo Xiaobao said seriously, "A man's head and a woman's waist. We can only look but not touch." He then turned and ran back to Mr. Qing Yun's side. Mr. Qingyun lovingly held his great-grandson in his arms. He smiled and rubbed his little head, saying, "You can only look but not touch." Who taught you all this nonsense? Han Mingxi. Mo Xiaobao sold Han Mingxi out without any hesitation, completely oblivious to the fact that Han Mingxi had contributed so many delicious and fun things to him. Mo Xiaobao laid on Mr. Qingyun's legs and curiously looked at the strange people in front of him. He didn't like his great-grandmother at all. His grandfather wasn't as good-looking as his first and second granduncle. That fatty, was he also his uncle? He was really too ugly. Mo Xiaobao covered his eyes and hid in Mr. Qingyun's arms. He didn't want to look at the fatty who was foolishly touching here and there. In Han Mingxi's words, that action and expression were too wretched. It hurt his eyes to look at it too much. Mo Xiaobao, who had high standards for aesthetics since he was young, expressed that this wretched fatty really challenged the bottom line of his aesthetics. He was even uglier than the beggars under the bridge in the north of the city. He definitely couldn't admit that he was his uncle. Greetings to first sir, greetings to second sir. Greetings to first sir, second sir. A maid's clear greeting came from outside the door. Yi Li, on the other hand, was overjoyed. It turned out that Big Brother had returned. Su Hongyu and Su Hongyan came in with Su Qingchen and Su Qingze. Uncle. Mo Xiaobao's eyes lit up. He got down from Mr. Qingyun's arms and happily rushed to Su Qingchen, who came in behind. Uncle, Yu Qin missed you so much. Su Qingchen smiled faintly. He leaned over and picked him up. Oh. Do you really miss Uncle so much? Mo Xiaobao's eyes were brighter. Looking at Su Qingchen, who had already passed by, he was still handsome as if untainted by the mortal world. He nodded again and again. He just met a wretched and ugly man. He urgently needed Uncle's handsome face to comfort his crumbling aesthetics. Yu Qin likes Uncle the most. So, Uncle is the real handsome man. Father is simply weak. I really want to touch it. Mo Xiaobao secretly drooled. So, Han Mingxi is still better. He can touch it casually. Uncle is too powerful. He can only looking at her son's big eyes flashing with the brilliance that Han Mingxi sometimes can't compare to. Yi Li couldn't help but cover her face. Xiao Yao was right. She really shouldn't let Mo Xiaobao meet Han Mingxi so often. Yi Li forgot that Mo Xiaobao was naturally lustful. He was close to Han Mingxi because of his good looks. He didn't start liking beauty after being close to Han Mingxi. The unlucky Mr. Feng Yu was also shot while lying down. Chapter 727. Father. Grandfather. Su Hongyu and the other three bowed to Mr. Qingyun. Mr. Qingyun looked at his son and grandson in front of him and his great-grandson in Su Qingchen's arms. The anger that was aroused by Yi Wenhua gradually dissipated. He nodded and said, "Sit down and talk. When did Qin come back?" Su Qingchen smiled, "Grandfather, I just arrived. I was just about to come and greet you when I heard that there were guests. So, father, second uncle, and second brother all came." Mr. Qingyun nodded and smiled, "You must be tired. Have a good rest." Because the Yi family was sitting there, it was a bit awkward when Su Hongyu and the others came. Madame Yi thought that she would not give up her seat for anyone after the new year. Fortunately, Yi Wenhua had been in the government for decades and was not really insensible. He quickly stood up and gave up his seat for Su Hongyu. Madame Yi, Yi Lin, and the young man who sat on the other side also stood up. Yi Rong was the only one who didn't know any better. She looked at her parents and didn't stand up. Yi Wenhua was so angry that his face turned green and white. Su Hongyu did not care about Yi Rong's expression. He smiled and looked at Yi Rong. The Yi family has a good upbringing. Yi Rong was praised with the same words twice in a row. He became more and more proud. He did not understand why his father's face was so ugly. Although Madame Yi knew that something was wrong, Yi Rong was the only son of the Yi family for so many years. Naturally, she loved him very much. A few years ago, Madame Yi still thought that her son could give birth to a grandson. But these years, there was no news, so this thought gradually faded. She only thought that this was her granddaughter's mansion. It should not be a problem. Yili looked at the Yi family's expression and shook her head helplessly. Although she did have some problems with the Yi family, she was not the kind of person who liked to hit people when they were down. If Yi Wenhua could train Yi Rong to be a talent, he might be able to have a bright future in the northwest. Unfortunately, the current state of the Yi family was very disappointing. Although Yi Li wouldn't do anything to the Yi family, it didn't mean that she would be so kind as to help a relative who couldn't even be helped. She was afraid that she would smear the reputation of the Prince Ding mansion for no reason. Su Qingchen placed a Mo Xiaobao on her lap and teased him. She smiled at Yi Wenhua and asked, "When did Master Yi arrive at Glass City?" The smile on Yi Wenhua's face was somewhat forced. In the past, Su Qingchen would give him face and call him uncle when they met. Now, she was not even willing to do this. Su Shi, who had died young, did not leave behind a son for the Yi family. She only had one daughter, Yi Li. Now that Yi Li was already married, there was nothing wrong with the Su family not recognizing the Yi family as their in-laws. He has been here for more than a month. Yi Wenhua forced a smile. Su Qingchen nodded and said, "During this period of time, Li He and Prince Ding were away on an expedition. I was also far away at Feihong Pass. Father and second uncle are busy with official business. If there is anything that we have neglected, Master Yi, please forgive us." Yi Wenhua did not dare to complain about Su Hongyu's neglect. In front of Su Hongyu, even if Yi Wenhua was a minister, he still felt that he could not raise his head. Although it was not so serious to Su Hongyan, there was still a natural sense of inferiority. Therefore, for so many years in Chujing, Su Hongyan's official position and power were not as good as Yi Wenhua, who was a minister and Zhao Yi's father, but Yi Wenhua never put on airs in front of Su Hongyan. It was also because of this that Yi Wenhua never liked the Su family. No man with ambition would like to always be at the bottom in front of the other family. Unfortunately, Yi Wenhua was already at the bottom in front of the Su family. Old Madame Yi smiled and said before Yi Wenhua, "How can that be? We are all family. Even if we are wronged for a while, it is nothing. Li is also filial. Naturally, she will not mistreat her family." Su Qingchen raised his eyebrows and looked at old Madame Yi with a faint smile. She still felt that she was mistreated. Su Hongyu asked, "What is the Yi family's plan in the future?" Yi Wenhua just wanted to say that it was up to his eldest brother. Before he could say anything, he heard old Madame Yi looking at Yi Li with a smile and said, "Li was not at home before. Now, Li is a few months pregnant. Prince Ding is not at home. Naturally, we have to take care of Li in the mansion." Hearing this, second Madame Su was so angry that she was amused. She said indifferently, "So old Madame Yi thinks that we are decorations?" "Madam." Su Hongyan calmed second Madame Su's anger. It was a loss of dignity to argue with such a family. Second Madame Su was also angered by old Madame Ye's shamelessness. After being reminded by her husband, she naturally suppressed her anger. She glanced at old Madame Yi with disdain and did not say anything. If Li Er's mother was still alive, it would be right for her to live in the mansion to take care of her daughter. However, only old Madame Yi had the nerve to say that to bring a concubine to live in the mansion of the legitimate daughter. In fact, old Madame Yi also knew that what she said was improper. However, her life experience could be said to be ups and downs. That year, she was a widow with a son in a remote place in Dechu State. Later, her son became a jincher and was recruited as a son-in-law by the Su family. Suddenly, she became the most distant and noble family in Dechu State. Later, she became the old madam of the minister's mansion. Of the several granddaughters, one became an imperial concubine and the other two became princesses. Later, Yi Wenhua was demoted to a commoner by the emperor. They returned to their hometown. Although they had some money and lived well, compared to the life in Dechu, it was like heaven and earth was turned upside down. How could old Madame Yi accept this? Now that they were in Li City, although she had the identity of Princess Ding's grandmother, many of the noble ladies in Li City did not think much of her. Looking at the two madams of the Su family, even the young second madam of the Su family was one of the most sought-after people in Li City. Wasn't all of this because of Yi Li, Princess Ding? This also strengthened old Madame Ye's idea of living in the mansion. Although Yi Wangshe did not say anything, looking at her expression, one could tell that what old Madame Yi said was also what she was thinking. In this hall, other than the few members of the Yi family, which one of them was not a smart person? Naturally, they could see through their thoughts clearly and disdained this family's behavior even more. Mo Xiaobao sat in Su Qingchen's arms and asked curiously, "Mother, grandfather and grandmother are going to live in our house?" Yi Li smiled but did not answer. She looked at her son with a smile and asked, "Do you like it, Xiaobao?" Mo Xiaobao hesitated for a moment and asked puzzledly, "Why do grandfather and grandmother want to live in our house? Didn't uncle prepare a house for them? Could it be that their house is not suitable for people to live in?" Old Madame Yi looked at Mo Xiaobao lovingly and smiled, "Your mother is pregnant. Grandmother can stay in the mansion to take care of her. Also, your grandfather can teach you. Your grandfather used to be a jincher. Also, your uncle Rong can play with you." Chapter 728. Mo Xiaobao pouted and buried his face in Su Qingchen's arms. "I don't want to play with such an ugly person. It's okay if he's ugly, but he's so stupid." He didn't even notice the sarcasm in his uncle's words. "I'd rather play with my uncle and Han Mingxi." "What's a jincher? Is it very powerful?" Mo Xiaobao blinked and asked. Su Qingchen smiled faintly and said, "Your grandpa, granduncle, and uncles have all been jincher. Jincher might be powerful in other places, but in the Su family, it was the most worthless. For hundreds of years, all the children of the Su family had at least been jincher in the first-class list. In other words, in the Su family, one had to pass the jincher exam to be considered successful." Hearing this, Mo Xiaobao looked at Madame Yi sincerely and said, "We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have 8 jincher in our family. And I have my grandpa to teach me. Is my grandfather better than my grandpa?" Yi Wenhua was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. He smiled and said, "Your grandpa is the best in the world. It's a great blessing to be able to study with him. How can your grandfather be compared to?" Hearing Mo Xiaobao's words, Madame Ye's face turned ugly. She started to dislike this great-grandson who didn't give her any face. But she still had some sense. She knew that Mo Xiaobao's identity wasn't someone she could casually scold. Yi Li looked at her son who was nestled in Su Qingchen's arms and made a face at her. She smiled and looked at Yi Wenhua and asked, "Father, is there anything wrong with the place you're living now?" Yi Wenhua quickly said, "No, second brother arranged a house on Xuanwu Street. It's very spacious. There's nothing wrong with it." After not seeing his daughter for so many years, Yi Wenhua no longer had the feeling of being a superior father. Instead, he felt a little guilty. It had been a few years since they last saw each other. Although Yi Li was still as gentle and elegant as before, her experience as a leader and several expeditions had inevitably engraved an imposing and majestic aura on her body that made people bow down to her. The people who saw her every day might not feel it, but Yi Wenhua could clearly feel that his daughter was not the same as before. Yi Li nodded. That's good. If there's anything bad, father, you can mention it here. That way, outsiders won't think that Prince is mistreating his elders. Yi Wenhua hurriedly said that everything was fine. He understood that this was Yi Li's warning to him. If he stayed in Glass City obediently, he wouldn't have to worry about food and clothing. However, if he still had any improper thoughts, he shouldn't blame her for being heartless. Although Yi Wenhua couldn't help but feel a little uncomfortable being treated like this by his own daughter, he couldn't help but think of the Su family that he had neglected Su's and Yi Li in the past. He couldn't help but feel even more guilty. Yi Li nodded in satisfaction when she saw Yi Wenhua's reaction. Yi Wenhua wasn't a fool. Although he blindly wanted to climb up the social ladder and was unfaithful to his wife, he wasn't a fool. If he was alone, Yi Li wouldn't be worried. She didn't mind raising him in Glass City without worrying about food and clothing for the rest of his life. It could be considered as completing the blood relationship. It was a pity that old Madame Yi and Madame Yi weren't obedient. Yi Wenhua didn't have enough control over his wife and mother. He had to send people to keep an eye on them to prevent them from causing any trouble. Su Hongyu and the others only came to show their faces. They were very busy and naturally didn't have time to chat with Yi Wenhua. After sitting for a while, Su Hongyu and the others got up and helped Master Qingyun to rest. Su Qingchen also took Imo Xiaobao, who was leaning on her, away. Only Yi Li was left with Yi Wenhua and the others. But even so, old Madame Yi didn't have the chance to get close to Yi Li and say anything intimate. After the Su family left, Qing Shuang and Qin Feng walked in. They stood on Yi Li's left and right and stared at the Yi family vigilantly. Originally, it wasn't just this. But last time in the Emperor of Xiling City, Qin Feng and the others were quite frightened. So now, Qin Feng and the others really treated Yi Li as a weak girl. As long as there were outsiders, Qin Feng, Zhuo Jing, Lin Han, and the others had to stay within 3 steps of Yi Li. Although Yi Li was a little helpless, she knew that they were worried about her. So, she didn't say anything more. Suddenly, there were fewer people in the parlor. It was quieter. Master Qingyun and Su Hongyu weren't here. Yi Wenhua's face was much better. The parlor was silent for a while. After a while, Yi Wenhua coughed and asked, "How has Li He been these years?" Yi Li nodded and smiled, "Thank you for your concern, father. Everything is fine." Now that the Su family was gone, old Madame Yi was more relaxed. She looked at Yi Li and said, "I heard that you went to war with Prince Ding. You are a girl. Why didn't you stay at home and take care of your husband and children? Why did you go to war? If outsiders see you, they will think that our family's education is bad." Just now, old Madame Yi was angered by Imo Xiaobao. She didn't dare to get angry at the Su family. But she didn't feel any pressure to scold Yi Li. As soon as she said that, he saw the faint smile on Yi Li's face. Yi Wenhua's heart skipped a beat. He knew that something bad was going to happen. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "Grandmother, you're worrying too much. Even if someone says something, it's just a small matter. Even if someone said that the Su family's education is bad, it has nothing to do with the Yi family." Although everyone in the world knew that Princess Ding's surname was Yi, there were only a few people who knew which Yi family she was from and who the Yi family was, except for the nobles in Chujing. After a few years, even the nobles in Chujing would forget about the Yi family. But everyone knew about the relationship between Yi Li and the Su family. Old Madame Ye's righteous scolding was rebutted back by Yi Li. Her face turned white and red. She stared at Yi Li and couldn't say anything for a long time. Yi Li didn't pay attention to her. She looked at Yi Lin, who was sitting at the back, and asked with a smile, "Is this sixth sister?" "And this is." Yi Li was a little restrained. When Yi Li mentioned her, she quickly went forward and bowed. "Lin greets third sister. This is my husband, Shen Liang." The young man standing next to Yi Lin quickly followed Yi Lin and said to Yi Li, "Shen Liang greets Princess Ding." He was a little flustered, but it could be seen that he was an honest person. Thinking of Yi Lin's smooth and slick personality when she was young, she flattered Yi Wangshe and Yi Ying. Presumably, such a husband was not what she had hoped for. But Yi Li had to say that it was Yi Lin's blessing to marry such a husband. "Why didn't fifth sister come?" Yi Li asked. Yi Li wasn't close to Yi Lin and Yi Shan, but she didn't have a bad impression of them. Although they followed Wang Shi to please Yi Ying and bullied her from time to time, it was for survival. If she made things difficult for these two children who were only 12 or 13 years old, it would be too low. Yi Wenhua sighed and told Yi Li about the Yi family in the past few years. In fact, it wasn't a big deal. There was only one thing. When Yi Lin and Yi Shan returned to their hometown, Yi Wenhua introduced them to two good local families. But 3 years ago, Yi Shan died in childbirth. Now Yi Lin had a daughter, but no son. Yi Lin's husband, Shen Liang, was a local rich businessman. But Shen Liang was the son of a concubine and couldn't inherit much of the family business. Now the southwest was occupied by the West Hill people and it was very chaotic. Shen Liang took the money he could get and followed them to the northwest.